All right, Chris, are we good to go?
Yeah.
All right, council, it's 5 o'clock, time to get down to work. So I will call the meeting to order and I'll read the land acknowledgement. Today, we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabek, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. I will look now to for the adoption of the agenda as amended. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that that the content of the council agenda for June 15, 2020 be adopted as amended. Addition of consent item 7.3 BIA request for funding for farmers market, and addition of staff report C 2020-7 economic recovery and support task force action item 4 community relaunch potential pilot locations street encroachments. So I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest tonight, council? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we progress through the agenda, please let me know and identify the nature of a conflict. Item 4, the adoption of the minutes. Moved by Councillor McLeod, seconded by Councillor Comey. Be it resolved that the minutes of the regular council meeting held May 25, 2020 be approved as presented. Council, any errors or omissions in the minutes from May 25? Seeing none, I'll call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And is there any business arising from the previous minutes? Seeing none, we will move on to community announcements. And I'll start with you, Deputy Mayor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I do not have anything this evening.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor McLeod?
I have nothing this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Comey, I think next. Do you have anything tonight?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Doherty?
Nothing for me this evening, Your Worship.
Councillor Madigan, you're hiding up there in the top.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a quick happy birthday to my good friend Liam Willis tonight, celebrating 41, being a new father. It's a good day for him. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Berman.
Deb, I think first.
I think I've done Deb. I'm taking a little bit out of order here because we're all over the screen, so I'm not going by the traditional line. So I'll call you next. Then I think I've got Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Hamlin to go.
Okay, my apologies. Nothing for me tonight. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jeffrey has nothing. Councillor Hamlin? Nothing for you, Councillor Hamlin?
No.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you. I have 2 announcements tonight. First, just to let everyone know that June is Seniors Month, and this year's theme is stay safe, stay in touch. And with the COVID crisis, we all want to make sure that our older residents are kept safe. And we are focusing on engaging and bringing together our seniors virtually this year. So if you reach out to your seniors and wish them a happy Seniors Month. And I have the unfortunate task tonight of bringing some bad news. Today we lost Susan Warner, who was the curator of the Collingwood Museum for, I think, over 20 years. She moved to Collingwood in 1967 and fell in love with the area and fell in love with the history. And she found her calling at the museum and loved bringing community together through our common stories. So our condolences to Susan and her family and her loved ones on this terrible loss. And with that being said, we'll move on to deputations. And we have 7 tonight. So I'm going to ask council if we can hold our questions to the end. We've asked our deputants to stay. And so once we've heard all the deputations, if you have a particular question of a particular deputant, we will ask them then. And the first deputation is the impact of hate speech and symbols in Collingwood. And the speaker is Prabha Mattappally. Chris, can we get Prabha online for us?
So the transitions generally take about 10 to 15 seconds.
Okay. Prabha, welcome today. We've got you, you're just on mute. There you go. And I will give you the floor now. You have 10 minutes.
Appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. My name is Prabha Mattappally, and I'm a resident of Collingwood. Thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak at tonight's council meeting in support of the motion by Councillor Hamlin to prohibit discriminatory signs and flags in Collingwood. I'm a second-generation Canadian. My parents immigrated to Canada from India, and I was born and raised in a small town in southwestern Ontario. Throughout my life, the vast majority of people I've encountered have been nothing but inclusive and welcoming. I've grown up surrounded by a loving network of friends who've ensured I be provided with the same opportunities as everyone else. Unfortunately, especially in the early years, my parents suffered from both overt and subtle acts of racism. From racial slurs to being passed over for jobs and opportunities for career advancement to having difficulty making friends, all because of the color of their skin. But despite these hurdles, they continue to work hard in order to achieve their goal of providing a better life for their children. But at 43 years of age, it shocks me to see this intolerance continue today. Last summer, my husband and I were driving along Hurontario Street and came across an outdoor advertisement board. Someone, or someones, had rearranged the letters to spell hate speech. I immediately reported this to the OPP, contacted both the store owner as well as neighboring stores to request their assistance in providing security surveillance video to police. I shared my experience with both Erica Engel at Collingwood Today and John Edwards at Simcoe News, and I shared my story through social media to raise awareness and encourage any silent voices to come forward. I'm disheartened by the police force's lack of response or follow-up on this very serious issue. This case was initially investigated as mischief. I personally don't understand what mischief has to do with this. This incident is nothing short of an intentional act of racism and homophobia and should have been treated as such. And so the fight against racism must continue. As proud residents of Collingwood, we need to turn up the volume of social justice to mute the noise of intolerance. Councillor Hamlin's motion to prohibit discriminatory signs and flags speaks loudly on behalf of the thousands of residents who embrace diversity in our beautiful town. Our community also spoke loudly last week during the Black Lives Matter protest. Organized in only a matter of days by some truly amazing high school students, over 2,000 people marched the busy streets of downtown Collingwood against racial injustice. The protesters were supported by local businesses like SBU Collingwood Variety, who handed out water to people as they walked by, and the OPP, who ensured a safe marching route. This coming together of residents, businesses, and law enforcement shows that we are all in this together. By prohibiting discriminatory signs and flags, we're not looking to erase history or asking residents to forget the past. As the saying goes, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. All symbols of history, such as the Confederate flag, the swastika, and the hoods of the KKK, must be displayed in their rightful place in museums and other institutions dedicated to telling the full story of history, the stories that make us proud to be Canadians and of our ancestors that fought for our country, but also the shameful stories of the past, slavery, residential schools, the Holocaust. These mistakes from history should never be repeated again. Prohibiting discriminatory signs and flags in Collingwood won't stop racists from being racist, but it is an important first step in acknowledging our intolerance for public displays of prejudice. No one deserves to be defined by anything other than the content of their character. Black, brown, white, short, tall, overweight, or skinny. While these are beautiful traits that make us each unique human beings, they in no way determine how one person should treat another. I hope my story and the stories of my fellow residents today help to provide some additional important context and council discusses this motion. I am proud to be part of this important and meaningful change in Collingwood. Thank you for your time.
Prabha, thank you very much for the powerful message. And as I said at the outset, we're going to hold the questions for the end. So if anyone has a question of you, that will be at the end of the other deputations, just so we can get everybody in. So
Right.
thank you for that. Okay. Next, we have Addressing Hate Speech by Andrew Siegwart from the Rainbow Club of Southern Georgian Bay.
So at this point, we don't see Andrew in our attendee list. If he is there, if he's able to raise his hand. It doesn't appear that he is, so through your worship, if you'd like to move to the next deputant.
Yes, so we'll go to 6.3, support for the prohibition of discriminatory signs and flags. Allison Fitzgerald from my friend's house, the Collingwood Crisis Center. Hi, Allison, welcome.
Thank you so much.
You have the floor. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Saunderson and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Allison Fitzgerald, and I'm the executive director of My Friend's House, an organization that provides safe refuge, therapeutic counseling, and transitional housing support to abused women and their children. My Friend's House is an organization founded on anti-violence principles. We believe that you cannot work toward ending one form of violence without ending all forms. As part of the broader anti-violence movement, it is our responsibility and commitment to work as allies, and that is why I am speaking today. Racism is violence. It is purposeful in its creation, its structure, and its maintenance. It is designed to give unearned advantages to white people in all social, economic, and political spheres. There is a tendency for white people to view incidents of racism as isolated and unexpected. In holding this view, it allows us to focus on the individual victim and perpetrator. What was he or she doing when the incident happened? It allows us to distance ourselves from the experiences of racialized people. It allows us to distance ourselves from the perpetrator. In its most simplistic form, it allows white people to say, well, I don't see or do anything like that, so I'm not racist. I don't see color. While individual racist comments and actions are deplorable and must be confronted, we deliberately ignore the structural forces at play. We victim blame. Why was he wearing a hoodie? We minimize. It's a few bad apples. We pathologize. It's just a few crazies. We stereotype. Why does she have to be so angry? And we hide behind individual rights and freedoms, citing the sanctity of free speech and private property rights. Enough. At My Friend's House, we hold the belief that ending violence against women is the responsibility of men, just as ending racism is the responsibility of white people. The issue is power. As a community, the town of Collingwood has embedded within its corporate policies a commitment to supporting inclusiveness and equity for all. As a community, we must all take action to disrupt racism. One action this town council can take is to establish a bylaw that stops the display of symbols of hate. As a community, to allow symbols of hate, like the Confederate flag, to fly, we are sending a clear message that our community will tolerate the intolerable. We are signaling to racialized community members and visitors alike that they are not safe here, nor are they welcome. My Friend's House strongly supports the adoption of a bylaw that will prohibit the display of symbols of hate and racial intolerance in both public and private spaces. To quote Sweet Honey in the Rock, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. As a community, we cannot rest. We must continue to listen, to learn, to amplify the voices of Black leaders and keep moving toward change each and every day. And if this is a movement, we had better get moving. Lives literally do depend on it. Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And we'll ask if you, we're doing the questions at the end. So if you just wait in the lobby, if anyone has questions, we'll get to you then. So thank you very much for that. Next on the list, we have a 6.4 letter of support for prohibition of discriminatory signs and flags from Elder Jeff Monague, and it's being read by Lisa Farano.
Hi.
Hi, Lisa.
Next. Hi, I'm Marcia Alderson. Sorry, I was rejoining during all of that.
Okay.
Could be where Andrew is stuck in cyberspace as well, and seems to be a rejoining again. Okay, are we all right now?
Yeah, we've got the letter up.
Okay, terrific.
So go ahead.
All right, so this letter was written by Elder Jeff Monague, who's actually worked with both Mayor Saunderson and one of the council members in a group of us this past week. He can't be here today, but he wanted me to start by writing this letter and then finishing with a few remarks afterwards. So, Mayors of Council, I am writing to offer some thoughts gained from a lifetime of personal experience for you to consider regarding the issue of hate symbols such as the Confederate flag being displayed publicly. As an Indigenous person, I'm subjected to racist symbolism on a daily basis with sports and school mascots that depict Indigenous peoples not as human beings, but as talisman. These symbols serve only to aid in dehumanizing a people. As a member of the Canadian Armed Forces in the 1980s, I was able to travel throughout much of Europe while stationed in Germany and witnessed personally the harmful effects that the Third Reich, Hitler, and the Nazi Party had on many of the countries I visited. The German government did much to ensure that hateful Nazi symbolism and propaganda would be deemed as illegal. I'm perplexed that after all this time, I see those same symbols displayed openly in Canadian cities and towns like Collingwood. My grandfather and many of yours who fought to protect us from such hatred would be equally perplexed that this hatred and all related symbolism still exists. Today, as a leader and elder knowledge keeper within my community, I've had to assist other municipalities in quelling the rise of hatred and its symbolism throughout our traditional territory, and we've been successful in many campaigns. I am hoping that the town of Collingwood would see fit to continue this trend and make our towns and cities safe for everyone. I thank you for your time, Chi Miigwech, B. Jeff Monague, Elder, Knowledge Keeper, and the former Chief of Beausoleil First Nation. So I just wanted to say that this issue was originally brought to my attention last fall by a friend of mine and an elder in Saugeen First Nation, who called me to say that this Confederate flag had been flying in Collingwood and was extremely unsettling to both her and to her community members. And could I do anything about it? And I mean, I had to say, you know, this is a flag that's flying. I don't have any authority or power. It's flying legally, and there's not a lot I could do, but I would look into it. So I did find out that there was an article that had come out in the local paper, and a petition had been started. So I did what a lot of people do, and I just assumed that something was being done about it. So I got back to her and I said, I'm pretty sure that the town is looking at it. I think I was wrong at the time, and pushed back to, or spring forward to about 3 weeks ago. My friend Peter Hodgson called me up and he said, you know, Lisa, there's this petition out there and it's got over about 200 signatures in it. And it was exactly the issue that had been brought to my attention last fall. And he asked me, would I consider sharing this petition with him, and let's see if it can get any traction and we can bring it to the attention of the town once again. Well, as we all know, within 3 weeks, that petition has received close to 30,000 signatures to ban hate messaging, symbols of hate, any communication that is repressing any other person in the town of Collingwood. And there's only about 10,900 registered households in the town of Collingwood. So that's a huge amount of attention. It's seen the CBC, the Toronto Star. It was on Narcity yesterday and again on the radio today. I have brought it to the attention of other local Indigenous communities that are very, very interested in standing with us and in helping Mayor Saunderson and Town Council in pushing this issue forward. And they're helping, their mayor, or Jeff Monague, Elder Jeff, spoke with Mayor Saunderson last week and said that he would offer all of his support as he has worked with Mayor Steve Clark in Aurelia to pass this same bylaw, and has helped the mayor in Owen Sound as well to pass this same bylaw with no repercussions, with no cases coming up against the community. It was done peacefully and it was done well, and they are now delivering circles of communication in those communities that are helping to re-educate the citizens of those communities. And these are all done with the support of local Indigenous communities. So I want to end, because I can't speak for all of these different people, and I know that this issue is going to come up. They'll be here to speak for themselves, but we can't change the past. We can't blame any past inaction on this administration. We can't blame the setup of systemic inaction on this administration. But what we are all experiencing right now is a tipping point globally. We've seen this erupt in the last 3 to 6 weeks to 2 months, and we've seen it the way it has not happened before. So we all have the opportunity right now to take this issue as far as we can take it and be examples for these other communities that we know are wanting to do this, that are looking for help, that are looking for support. It's our chance, it's our time. We're here with you, and I'd like to see this motion passed tonight so that staff will look into the issue further, and that another motion is brought before council so that we can, in fact, enact an enforceable bylaw that will ban this messaging in this community and make all those that are coming to this community that are diverse welcome here.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Amigwich to the Elder Monague. Next, we have 6.5, support for the prohibition of discriminatory flags and signs. Marcia Alderson. Good evening, Marcia. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson and Council, and thank you, Councillor Hamlin, for bringing this to Council. I don't know if you all know me. My name is Marcia Alderson. I am a real estate broker on the Chris Kelleher team at Royal LePage in town. And I am also a biracial citizen of Collingwood. My mother was a Jamaican nurse. I was born in Jamaica myself, and my father was a very Canadian real estate agent. I like to think of him as possibly the whitest man in Canada. And my mother came to Canada in the 50s. I was a young woman, as a nurse, and took her about 10 years. And she saved her money and she decided to buy her first house. Some of you may have heard this story already, but let me just say it very quickly. She went to buy her first house. My father was the real estate agent on the site. She put down her money, she signed the offer full price, and he proudly took it to the builder and said, here, well qualified Jamaican nurse has presented this offer. And the builder threw it back at him. This is the early 60s, and said, I am not selling to those people. I don't know what word he used, but you get the general gist. So where the story gets interesting is that my father went back, told my mother exactly what the builder had said. My mother, being the woman that she was, decided to take the builder to human rights, and my father testified for her. He wound up losing his job doing that. And from there, she got her house. Human rights said, yes, absolutely, you get your house. They started dating, they got married, they made me. So here I am now in Collingwood. And I think it gives me two things that give me a great perspective on this. I am a real estate broker in town, and I'm biracial. So I see both sides of this. There's only one side, we're the human race. Now, I can't believe that 60 years later, we are still fighting this fight. My parents started it in their own way, and now it's my turn. So, having symbols of any form of hate, discrimination, anything like that flying in our town is beyond unacceptable. And I can tell you from a business perspective, as a real estate agent, that is not what I want out there about Collingwood. We have to realize that now the world is changed. It has been changing for a while, but since George Floyd, it has changed exponentially. Now, we are looking at a lot of Toronto coming up this way, and there is going to be a lot of diversity coming into this town, which brings lots of money, lots of great new ideas, a fresh perspective, but we need to be welcoming to them. I don't even know why we need to have this meeting, to be quite honest with you. This is a slam dunk to me. Find a way to create a bylaw. If you can't create a bylaw, then find a way to move it to the next level of government, then to the next level of government. And if I have to go to Justin Trudeau, I will. This has to end. I will say, I appreciate you all getting back to me. I'm sure you got several emails in the last week or so from a lot of people. And everybody pretty much responded, and you've been very kind, and I appreciated this. But now we need to see action. We need to see action tonight. And Collingwood is watching. And if you've been at any, and I do appreciate Mayor Saunderson, you standing up at our rally last night. I was merely a spectator, but standing at our rally last night, and you did hear, I did try to quiet the crowd, you did hear, they have spoken. Our town is speaking, and it is not just people of color. I am so proud of this town. It is everybody, with the exception of a few that might be flying some flags or have put up the Mississippi flag, by the way. That one came down, but another version went up. Just the fact that we maybe suggested that this man should take it down, it's not enough. We need a bylaw to prevent anything ever flying like that in our town again. That does not belong in my Collingwood. I won't have it. And pretty much, I think the 2,000 people that were marching up and down the main streets, they won't have it either. And I can certainly tell you the youth won't have it. So please, let's land on the right side of history here. Let's lead, let's not follow. It's been done before. There is a way. But what we need tonight is a decision that moves us forward. Moves us forward to be that community that opens itself up to be welcoming to the rest of the world, visitors, new home buyers, everybody, that they come into this town and they feel welcome and accepted. And let's get rid of all this negative publicity that is happening. And let's come out with a decision that says Collingwood will not stand for it. Enough is enough. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marcia. And we'll ask you if you don't mind waiting in the lobby there, if anyone has any questions for you at the end. Item 6.6, prohibition of offensive and discriminatory signs and flags. Nicole Valonqar. Good evening, Nicole. Welcome.
Hi, sorry about that. A little rejoining issue.
You have 10 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. My name is Nicole Valonqar. For my part, I'm here to ask you today to consider amending the sign bylaw to include flags and to also add a prohibition against signs that are discriminatory in nature. I have provided to each of you this evening through Christopher Sargent copies of the bylaws of Owen Sound, Orillia, and Barrie. These sign bylaws of these municipalities all include provisions that prohibit signs and, in some instances, flags that use discriminatory remarks, abusive language, and hate messages. I've had calls and emails with many of you, and we have discussed whether or not the Municipal Act allows council to make bylaws that prohibit certain messages. Now, I will be the first to admit I am neither a constitutional scholar nor am I a municipal lawyer, but I am a lawyer with human rights experience. And I want to tell you briefly about two important legal decisions. The first is an old one. It's from 1929, and it's called the Persons case. It's where a group of women, known as the Famous Five, challenged the rule that women could not sit as Canadian senators because, by legal definition, women weren't people. The second case is much more recent. It's a 2004 same-sex marriage reference case. That case was brought to the Supreme Court of Canada, and it was a culmination of a patchwork of lower court rulings across the country that were all dealing with whether or not same-sex couples could get married. Ultimately, we all know that the court ruled that women are people and that same-sex couples can get married. But these two cases have two really important things in common. First, they touch on what us lawyers call the living tree doctrine. And what that means is that our Constitution, our charter, is not to be interpreted based on the world at the time it was written, but rather it should be interpreted and read in a way that ensures it adapts and reflects changes in society as we live today. The second thing that these cases have in common is that they started when a group of people were brave enough to stand up and say, this isn't right and it needs to change. Now, I'm not here today to tell you that we want you to create a law or a bylaw that's not enforceable. That doesn't help anybody. But what I am here today to ask you is to consider how you frame your question to the town solicitors. If you say to them, can we amend our bylaw to prohibit signs and symbols of hate, you're going to get a list of how the law sits today and how it's historically been treated. But if instead you ask, we would like to prohibit signs and symbols of hate from being displayed in our town, can you please help us find a way to do that that's enforceable? You will get clear directions and wording that will likely withstand scrutiny. Every single one of you on council ran on a platform promising change, but change requires challenge. It requires you to be willing to step outside of your box and to engage in problem solving in ways that you probably haven't before. It requires your leadership and your willingness to push through barriers and obstacles that are in your way. We all want Collingwood to be more inclusive and diverse. Councillor Hamlin's motion is the first of many steps towards that goal. Please, we're asking you to be the change makers that we elected. Be prepared to have those difficult conversations and to do the hard work that is needed to truly make Collingwood the diverse and inclusive community we all want it to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for that. The next speaker is 6.7, Prohibition of Offensive and Discriminatory Signs and Flags, Abigail Hitchens. Chris, do we have Abigail with us tonight?
Put your hand up.
Hand up.
Where's
Where's the hand up? There you are. Start video. Hello?
We can hear you. Oh, now we've got you. Good evening, Abigail. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
We're good, thank you.
Good.
The floor is yours and you have 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Abigail Hitchens and I am a mom. I would like to first start my message with thanks to the Anishinaabek people for the privilege of growing up on and having a home in their sacred lands. I grew up in this area, surrounded by beautiful lands, skiing on the hills and swimming in the clear waters of the bay. My childhood was beautiful, except for a few points, one of which rests with me to this day, when I was held down to the ground by 4 youths and a fifth painted a lipstick bindi on my forehead, so the school could see who I was. I have never told a single person, not even my family, about this assault on my person until recently. And it has impacted me for life. As I have aged, I'm sad not for myself, but for the children who did this to me, because with time I realized this was a learned pattern of behavior, one not learned at school, but at home. I have always held faith in our school systems to be able to make a marked change for every new generation, teaching inclusion and acceptance. Fast forward to 4 years ago, when my son went to a local school and was subjected to racism based on the color of his skin at age 4. The school did not hear us and showed us a lack of compassion until we went to the Board of Education for help. Again, we realized the school did not teach this behavior. This behavior is learned at home, but the school did not offer the tools required to help until the board was made aware by us and then could help offer them. We carried on peacefully. 2 years ago, our son was accepted into the French immersion program at a new school. He began to thrive until one day he noticed a flag that was different to all the rest of the flags that he knew, and he asked me about it. My son had already lost much of his colorblind innocence, and I was sickened to have to teach him the history, in the gentlest forms possible, about the true value. Are you still there?
We've got you, Abigail. We can still see and hear you.
Okay, good. I had to teach him about the true history of the flag upon realizing he had learned incorrect stories from comrades at his school. He learned about slavery, world wars, and the Jim Crow era. He learned about many hateful symbols and people who divided the world based on race or religion by the age of 7. He also learned about loving symbols and symbols designed to inspire and lead us to be better human beings. However, he no longer wanted to walk on the same street as that flag, despite the fact that it is the safest route for us to take to school, getting us off of a busy highway faster. I encouraged him to face his thoughts and fears of oppression, and find ways to conquer them. Christmas came and he arrived home with this series of words. Watch out for the man who is black. He is the one with the knife behind his back. I'll repeat those words in case you didn't hear them correctly the first time. Watch out for the man who is black. He is the one with a knife behind his back. To put it mildly, I was horrified because I knew this had come from a home, not a school. We discussed the issues of racism again, and this new school was great at communication and implementing assemblies about inclusion. But I knew indoctrination was still happening in some homes, and it continues, and it will take a long time to undo this learning. One day, he reached out to me to ask how we might be able to put symbols of hatred out of our communities. I looked at bylaw and was astonished to see that I had no recourse legally. So I said some people start petitions to enact change, and there it began. However, I was stonewalled by 80 signatures and vitriolic language hurled at me. Hateful graffiti was painted on doors and signs in our community, and I let the petition go, not wanting to possibly have to paint my newly resurfaced home in a new color not chosen by us. Fast forward to 20 or so days ago, a man named George Floyd was murdered. Another man, and another black man, and another and another. My son overheard us speaking when he was supposed to be in bed. He asked me the other day about it, and I explained that this is why he has to behave differently to everyone else in our community. It isn't fair, it isn't right, it just is. He was so incredibly hurt and incensed that he made his own stand, donned a Wakanda Forever shirt in defiance, and asked to have his picture taken to show the world. He also asked how the petition was going. So I started it back up. In this period of time, a few incredible members of our community reached out to help me and share it amongst our community of citizens, visitors, and neighboring towns, all of whom rely on Collingwood as a central point of access to many amenities. The petition has snowballed, and along with it, my level of learning. People in our community have been reaching out to me, telling me their stories from all races and religions, even members of the immigrant workforce. For a while, my soul has felt immense pain, but I have also seen and recognized immense compassion, love, and learning. Collingwood wants to create a message of inclusivity, a campaign of welcoming for all people of all races and creeds. But all good campaigns start with a message and end with a ruling or consequence. Think about drunk driving. It was once okay to do this, but with a campaign of education followed with a legislation, people have been taught that this is no longer acceptable behavior. The same applies to the seatbelt campaigns. Human beings need to be taught in order to further their knowledge base, and sometimes that teaching has to come with a consequence to help drive the impact of the behavior home. I have learned that our schools can only do so much to teach a lesson of inclusion and acceptance. Our community needs to stand together with them and become pillars of support to help them. It needs to enact enforceable, lawful legislation against hatred, hate speech, and symbolism. Who wants to walk into town to buy ice cream and have to pass a passive-aggressive form of suppression indoctrination? I have had so many parents of white children also call me to ask how to start the conversation with their children. They are upset that their children are also being indoctrinated into thinking this behavior is acceptable. My request is in 3 parts or stages. We are already in the first stage, communication. By communicating, we learn about a problem and can find a way to resolve it. Stage 2 is in 2 parts. The first is to create a campaign of awareness. Let people know it is okay to learn. It is okay that they may be innocently racist due to the nature of the environment we live in. An example of this is the constant use of our ahead of a culture or race of people. I didn't even realize my own racism until recently when I said our First Nations people. It signifies an ancient patriarchy of ownership and continues to oppress simply through the innocuous use of language. We need to create safe learning environments for those interested in change, so they can continue the messages of education. Create a town-based team of accessible, easy to identify people who are known to have resources to help. Create a team who will go help clean up when a member of our community has hateful speech or symbols written onto their properties. Show them you care and you are compassionate. Make these teams visible and easy to access. The second part of stage 2 is upholding this campaign of peaceful and educated messaging with a consequence. Every good campaign ever created has always had a consequence action. Create a bylaw with consequences that can be enforced, that requests of people not to hang symbols, flags, or propaganda of hatred within our community. Use language that can support this legally and credibly. Part 3. When this bylaw is enacted, were it to be challenged, take it further. Stand up for what is right. Unite with the other municipalities who have already enacted this change and say why it is right. Create a shield for your weakest citizens and defend them. Protect them. Educate them. They are our future. Show your citizens you really are inclusive. Show them you will defend their right to live in peace without hateful indoctrination by enacting legislation that proves it. There are so many symbols in the world designed to inspire, lead, and champion the human cause. Let Collingwood, the waters, the hills, the fields, and the people themselves become that symbol. A true jewel of beauty, both in the physical form, but also the philosophical. In the midst of Ontario, a beacon showing all people you truly do want to affect change and that you will enforce it to make them feel safe, and that all people from all walks of life are welcomed here without having to absorb hatred that is visible, and encouraging change to the invisible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Abigail, for those comments. And we'll ask that you wait in the lobby, please. And if we have any questions at the end, we'll let you know. Our last speaker, Sarah, I don't know if Andrew's been able to join us, but we'll go back to 6.2, addressing hate speech. Andrew Siegwart from the Rainbow Club of South Georgian Bay. Has Andrew been able to join us?
Yes, he's here now, so we'll allow him in.
Great, thank you. Hi, Andrew. Welcome. You're on mute. We've got you on. You're on mute there. Great.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. All right, Andrew, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes. I will be brief. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, all councillors. I am joining you today on behalf of the Rainbow Club of South Georgian Bay, which is a community group that is dedicated to supporting and creating safe spaces for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, and allied communities. We have been operating for a couple of years now with a message of inclusivity and diversity. Many of you are very aware of the work that we've been working on in the last year or so to host Collingwood's first ever Pride celebrations. They were scheduled for July of this year, but they have been bumped forward to July 2021 because of COVID-19. I will be very brief, and I just want to, on behalf of all of the members of our Rainbow Club and our community, I want to support the motions that have been tabled today, and I want to challenge and ask to challenge council on behalf of our members to consider implementing measures that will send a clear message that symbols of hatred, that acts of hatred, and speech that is hate motivated be challenged in our community and our society. If there has not been a time to do this other than now, I don't know when there will be. And I think what council in Collingwood will be remembered for is bravery to take action and to support these measures and to make a difference and to make a stand. So on behalf of our members of the Rainbow Club of South Georgian Bay, and on behalf of myself personally, I encourage you to do the right thing, send the proper message, and let everyone know that our community is one that is inclusive, that respects all, and that will stand up to bullies and stand up to hate speech. I personally have been subjected to hate speech and bullying of a different kind in my life, and I have a small sense of what it's like. I can only imagine what folks are feeling dealing with this particular issue in relation to Confederate flags and hate speech of a whole different scenario. So I hope that the town will make a decision here on leadership and support these measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. If you're able to stay, we're going to take questions now. We've gone through all of the deputations. So I will open the floor to questions. Council, if you have questions of any of the deputants, and we will patch that through. Councillor Hamlin, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, all the speakers were amazing, but I wanted to just, through you, ask Abigail a question. Abigail, you're very inspiring and you've done so much work on this issue. Can you tell us how many signatures you have on your petition today, as of today?
Chris, can you bring Abigail back, please?
I'm just having a look right now. When I looked this morning, it was 29,300 and change.
So amazing.
But now we're at 29,750. Well, hang on, it's ticking. I literally watched the signatures tick over. 29,775.
Thank you. Those are all my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Council, any other questions? Councillor Comey.
I have two, but the first one is for Prabha, please.
Chris, can you bring Prabha back, please?
Councillor Comey, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, thanks, Prabha. I didn't see you on the video. Thank you so much. Prabha, through you, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you so much because the story of your sign is a story of a situation where you could have kept driving. You did not have to stop and remove that hate speech. You didn't have to look for a bigger solution. You took that all upon yourself, and it's brought you all the way back in front of your town council. And it is, to me, along with many of the other stories we've heard, the definition of one person making a difference. So on behalf of the community, I want to thank you so much for doing the harder of the two choices. And I thought you spoke so eloquently this evening. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you, Prabha. Did you have another question, Councillor Comey?
Yes, please. It's for Abigail. And I'll let her come back.
So your worship, it's quicker for us just to unmute them so Abigail will be able to hear and respond.
Okay, let's do that then. Go ahead, Councillor Comey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Abigail, the first thing I want to do is publicly apologize to you. When I first read your story in Collingwood Today, way back in September of last year, as a town councillor, I did nothing. I took every single word I read at face value. I thought, well, you know, that's free speech and all. I did not challenge it. I made not one phone call, not even to you. For that, I'm ashamed. I hope you and your family can accept my apology. I thank you. Our community thanks you for not giving up, for not accepting apathy as an answer. I know that you have been subjected to much online criticism. My 13-year-old tells me these are called the haters. And for that, I want to share this with you. I don't know if you're familiar with Teddy Roosevelt's The Man in the Arena, but I feel these words so strongly resonate to you, and I'll share parts of it with you. It is not the critic that counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Thank you truly, Abigail, for asking your council to dare greatly. That is all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Comey. Are there any other questions or comments, Council, for our deputants today? Seeing none, I want to thank each of the deputants for taking the time to come and make these powerful presentations to Council. So thank you for that. So we will amend the agenda and we will bring forward Councillor Hamlin's motion, which was, I think, item 10.2 on the agenda. So we will deal with that motion now while we have our audience. So Councillor Hamlin, I will pass it over to you to read your motion and make any comments you would like. Councillor Hamlin, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm just looking for where it is on the agenda.
It's item 10.2 under notices of motion.
I have it. Thank you. The motion reads, whereas the town of Collingwood believes in diversity and inclusion and strongly opposes all forms of racism, and whereas the town's strategic plan prioritizes these same principles, and whereas the town is keenly aware of a local petition regarding the flying of flags or other symbols that can be associated with hate or racial intolerance, now therefore be it resolved that council requests staff investigate and report back on 1, options on how the town can advance and focus on community inclusivity and diversity, and 2, options available to the town to prohibit the public display of symbols of hate and racial intolerance in both public and private spaces, having regard to the limited jurisdiction of local government on account of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Moved by yourself and seconded by, do we have Councillor Comey? Is there, would you like to speak to your motion, Councillor Hamlin?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Council, Collingwood is an amazing place. We pride ourselves on the caring, kind, and civic-minded community we have built and continue to embrace. I am proud to be a Collingwoodian. However, we must acknowledge that there is racism in our community. Residents are sometimes made to feel unwelcome because of their race, color, or religion. This is unacceptable. There is a Confederate flag that flies on one of our streets. I have observed that some days it's flying, other days it's down. I think we can agree that the Confederate flag is a symbol of racism and white supremacy, a symbol that makes members of our community feel unsafe. Last evening, I joined the peaceful march organized by members of our community in support of Black Lives Matter. As we were leaving the area in front of Town Hall, 2 large pickup trucks drove by with very large Trump 2020 signs flying, all the while loudly revving their engines to give us the impression that they could turn their trucks towards us at any time. After they drove by twice, the OPP arrived and they disappeared. The purpose of this display was intimidation against those who would support an end to racism and discrimination. And it almost worked. I felt intimidated. I wondered whether any of us were liable to be hurt standing there in front of Town Hall. And it struck me that these are the same thoughts I have heard expressed by people of color in our community over and over again. We must all agree that symbols of hate, racism, and white supremacy have no place in front of our homes, on our streets, or anywhere in our community. No symbols should make any of our residents, or indeed visitors, feel unsafe and unwelcome. And let us make clear, Council, by our actions this evening and as we go forward, that racism and intimidation are not welcome here. Leading up to this meeting, I received hundreds of compelling emails from a cross-section of our community. Many had personal stories of experiencing racism and how it had impacted them. All of them urged me not to give up on this fight and begged Council to ban all symbols of hate from being shown anywhere in our community. Just one example of the pain this flag causes comes from Orrin Isaacs, a Canadian-based guitarist and record and television music producer. Orrin is also a Black man. He has produced several gold, platinum, and Juno-winning albums and has won numerous awards throughout his 27-year career. Orrin has allowed me to share with Council his story and the trauma he experiences when he sees a Confederate flag. Growing up in Toronto, Orrin saw the flag used alongside vile and racist slurs. It was used in hate crimes and, most tragically, in a racially motivated murder of a child in his community when he was 11 years old. It has strong associations for him and thousands of others with racism, hate, and fear. Do not think, fellow councillors, that Orrin's story is unique. We have heard from a broad spectrum of deputants this evening on the various kinds of intolerance that exists around us. All of them well-spoken, direct, and compelling in their stories and their visions of how we can do better. I believe in all of them, and I believe we can do better. I am asking in my motion today for 2 things, as you know. Firstly, for staff to report back on what options we have to prohibit the public display of symbols of hate and racial intolerance. There are many and various options that staff will report back on and that we will debate. I would ask staff specifically to allow for consideration of options that may require us as leaders in our community to push the boundaries of current thinking to embrace the well-accepted premise that the foundation of all our laws, our Constitution, is a living tree, as Nicole explained earlier, one that grows and expands as our thinking and societal norms change. Law must adapt to the changing times. I am not a fan of we can't cannot do that, and we have always done it this way. And for this first part of my motion, I ask that staff report back to us before the end of July. Time is of the essence. We have seen thousands of people march on our streets in the last week on 2 separate occasions in support of action being taken. The Toronto Star reported today that 33 communities in Ontario have already banned symbols of hate. Indeed, 2 towns in Simcoe County, being Barrie and Aurelia, have taken this step, as is Owen Sound. The road ahead of us has already been paved. We just need to get on board and drive down it. We just need to tell our lawyers to get out their pens and start drafting a strong bylaw. It is easy to say, maybe we can't. It might be hard. Someone might challenge us. Well, I'm saying this evening that we can and we should. The second part of my motion is broader. It asks for staff to investigate and report back on options as to how the town can advance and focus on community inclusivity and diversity. I've spoken to some of our senior staff. They are already focused on how to ensure inclusivity and diversity through their service to our community, and I believe are looking forward to working with us and our residents on taking this to the next level. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and fellow councillors, I ask for your support for the motion I have brought forward this evening. And Mr. Mayor, if I may also say, I'd be asking for a recorded vote. Thank you.
Clerk has that request. Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Council, questions or comments? Councillor Berman.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Just before I go ahead through you, was the addition of a date for staff to come back, does that need to be amended on the motion?
I'll look to the clerk on that.
Through your worship, I'm not sure that there was a date established, so through your worship, I would ask the CAO to address that question.
Go ahead, CAO Skinner.
Thank you. Through you, your worship. I have no concerns with bringing back the best staff report and advice we can prior to the end of July. We may not have every answer, but I think we'll have enough answers to know the path that we're on. And I would be flexible based on the clerk's advice on whether you would like to simply put that in the minutes as an instruction to staff or more formally in the motion itself. Either would be acceptable from my perspective, and we would endeavor with all vigor should you vote this forward to reply before the end of July.
Okay, great. So if I may, Mayor Saunderson, through you, just a couple of points. The first one is that I'll obviously be supporting this motion. I think those of us around the table know that this is the kind of motion we usually refer to as a no-brainer. In fact, since Councillor Hamlin brought this forward on June 3rd, I have genuinely been surprised that anybody would think that this wasn't going to pass unanimously. So we'll find out in a few minutes. I've been very surprised at the, even tonight with some of the deputants almost pleading for our votes. And I can't fathom anybody was going to think that we were going to vote against this. Secondly, I want to just expand on something that Councillor Comey addressed because she was spot on. I printed out the newspaper article that was done by Jessica Owen last year that started this with Abby. And most of you guys know I live right next door to Abby. It's actually my house that directly faces that flag, as most of you have seen. So this was September 20th of 2019. And as Councillor Comey said, I mean, it's right in there. Abby's pleading. She's talking about the fear of her and I know she wants to leave her son's name out of it, so I won't say his name. The story also has the town about our specific bylaws that are in place. It has comments from the OPP about what they can and can't do, and I think like I think where Councillor Comey was going is there's nothing. This is great. There's nothing heroic going on tonight because we are all, every resident that could have read this and every member of council that could have read this and some that did, we could have done something about this over the last 8 or 10 months, and we haven't. As I'm looking at the story on Facebook, one of my favorite expressions is that it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. And I think that's exactly what council's doing tonight. So I feel the same as everyone else. I won't repeat about the amazing speakers and what they said. And I hope I'm not wrong on my prediction.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Council, any other questions or comments? Councillor Comey and Councillor Doherty, I've got you after.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am going to offer a few words as seconder of Councillor Hamlin's motion. And Councillor Berman mentioned not being concerned with his fellow councillors. I think some of our residents might be concerned about this motion. So I share these words. I'm fully in support of Councillor Hamlin's motion. You all know me as Councillor Comey, but you could also refer to me by my married name, in which case you would call me Councillor Valdez. My husband is Trinidadian, a first-generation Canadian. When I brought this up a couple times during the election to residents, I was asked more than once if my kids were mixed. Mixed with what? Awesomeness? Definitely. If referring to me as Councillor Valdez would change your opinion of me in any way, then we have a long way to go in our community when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I lived and worked for half a decade in the American Southeast, hired right from Carleton University by a minority-owned engineering firm, launching wireless networks in Georgia, Tennessee, Virginia, Arkansas, and Mississippi. I spent another decade as president of a minority and veteran-owned engineering firm, living and working in the American Southwest, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico. Both my children are American-born. I am very much aware of the context in which the Confederate flag is flown. And I think our council, our county, and our country should pay great attention to the institutions that have recently banned this particular symbol and get on the right side of history when it comes to what we will do to stand in solidarity with our Black community. But to my constituents concerned with this motion, who may say, what does that have to do with Collingwood? Why should we care? Why is that a matter for us to be involved in? To that I say, because we are called upon to authentically become the community we are so quick to say we are, but that at times we falter in the delivery of. We must work to reconcile that a community that is dependent on tourism cannot be a community that's inclined to divide by us and them. Question where a family that is enjoying a picnic is from. We can't side-eye in the grocery store or suggest that people from Brampton are leaving garbage behind at Sunset Point. We must remind ourselves that we are a community that has welcomed Syrian refugees, people who have fled war and oppression and have been brought to our beautiful town, and they now call it home. We are a town with an international program at our local college. We are a town that markets itself as Tech Hub North. And as someone who has spent their entire career in tech, let me assure you, it is an industry rich in diversity. We are a town set to host the United Nations for a conference. The Secretary General of the United Nations made this statement just 5 days ago. Racism is abhorrent, nasty, and must be rejected everywhere at any moment, condemned in a clear way. Racism is the rejection of our common humanity, which is a central aspect against the Charter of the United Nations. But most importantly, we are a town with a little boy who has had to stare at a symbol of racism and oppression every single day. And I know for certain We are a community that will not stand for that. So I thank you again, Councillor Hamlin, for taking action and bringing this motion before council and the community. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Councillor Doherty, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I can hardly elaborate further actually on what has been said now already by Councillor Hamlin and Berman and now Councillor Comey. But I do feel that in spite of the fact that in the normal course of things, this is not considered to be part of our jurisdiction, that we have a moral responsibility to pursue it to every level of government that we possibly can, until we can make a statement to our entire community and indeed to our country that we won't tolerate this kind of behavior anymore, or these attitudes anymore.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you so much, Your Worship. I believe we are headed into the territory of deceased equines, so let's call the question, please.
Councillor, are you prepared to go? Are there any others that want to comment before we call the vote? All right, I will comment before we call the vote. And as I said last night at the rally, I believe that there are racial prejudices and barriers in our communities and in our perspective, and we have to confront those head on. And I believe that racism is a fight for all of us, regardless of our skin color, regardless of our ethnicity, regardless of our religion. We all have to do this together. This is a community endeavor. And so I'm looking forward to working with the staff when we get our report back to see what it is we can do. And I believe we are a community that wants to be diverse. And we've seen that in our UN initiative. We've seen that in our strategic plan. And I think we've seen that in some of our actions over the last few years. There is work to be done as a community. And I'll end up with a comment by the first Black First Lady of the United States of America, Michelle Obama, who said in her memoirs, if you don't get out there and define yourself, you'll be quickly and inaccurately defined by others. And I believe that applies to communities. And I believe that we will get out there and take action, and we will define Collingwood as a tolerant and diverse community. So with that being said, I'll pass that over to the clerk to call the recorded vote, please.
Through your worship, just to advise you, Councillor Berman has lost his internet connection, and with a recorded vote being requested, I'm wondering if we could hold off on that vote until he rejoins. In accordance with the procedural bylaw, we can allow a recess up to 10 minutes. Another option that I would put out there is staff had prepared a slide regarding this matter. Should you wish to listen to that quick presentation while Councillor Berman is reconnecting.
I will look to, I think it's CEO Skinner and Executive Director Culver that are doing the presentation, and I would think it would be appropriate to start the presentation until we get Councillor Berman back online. Oh, we've got him back online. There we go. All right. All right, Sarah, so it's over to you to call the vote, please.
Certainly, thank you. A recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand or your yes sign. Thank you. Motion is carried unanimous.
Thank you, Sarah. And I will pass it over then. We're going to bring forward item 14.2.2, which is an update from staff on diversity and inclusion actions that they're looking at.
So we have Executive Director Dean Culver, who's helped us in his new portfolio, spanning back to his portfolio as well in diversity and inclusion at PRC, to put something together in just to look at what was already in our strategic plan, and he'll talk about that. And Well, we want to point out we hadn't heard from the wonderful speakers tonight, but we did have we did suspect that the motion on the table would likely pass, and we thought that you would like this brief update today. So I'll turn it right over to Executive Director Culver.
Thank you, Sonia. Go ahead, Dean.
Okay, can everybody hear me? No? Okay, I'm messing with my controls here.
I think you have to speak up a bit if you can, Dean.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. My controls, and I'm just to give you a warning, I'm kind of messing with 3 screens here, and so it might be a little weird for a second, but can everybody see my PowerPoint screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Terrific. Okay. So as CAO Skinner mentioned, I was asked to do an update. This was particularly challenging with the intensity of everything going on around us, and I definitely feel that I'm not going to be able to do much more than what was done by the presenters in the delegation period. But I'll begin by saying I'd like to start by mentioning something obvious. Collingwood is an amazing place to live, and this was obviously mentioned by a number of speakers as well as Councillor Hamlin. It's not perfect though, and it has challenges that we need to work on if we're going to become the inclusive community that we know we want to be. Events both locally and around the world, in some cases tragic events, are creating inspiration and a desire for accelerated change. Collingwood has an opportunity to join this change and not be left behind by progress and the adjustments required to make equality happen. For the past few years, Council and staff have been working together on a pathway to greater inclusion in our community and a recognition of the strength that comes from diversity. Admittedly, it's been a slow progression, and it's been tucked into the many versions of growth that have both benefited and challenged our community. The construction of the Awen Gathering Place, for example, was an offshoot of the Waterfront Master Plan. The Waterfront Master Plan was not specifically an exercise in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was intended to support economic growth, tourism, and public access to one of the town's greatest natural heritage assets, the harbour and Georgian Bay. But even as an offshoot of a completely different intention, the construction of the gathering place provided our community with many lessons. Some of these lessons we are now proposing to be utilized in the face of this latest awakening. First and foremost, we must acknowledge the existence of privilege and then consciously work to remove it from the conversation. Next, we must constantly check and recheck that to ensure that it remains removed. A conversation where one has power over another is a one-sided conversation, and that simply won't work. The conversations may be uncomfortable and difficult, but it's time to have them. Secondly, we must strive to be active and engaged listeners. When we develop solutions without truly hearing, trusting, and engaging those who've been negatively affected, we are exercising another form of privilege. In the past, this approach has led to an added systemic racism rather than helping to remove it. Next, we have to test and retest that learnings are accurate. The cultural landscape of our community continues to change, and there are a multitude of experiences that will need to be understood to gain insight and find our way forward. Some of these experiences were heard at the downtown rally on June 8th, and some more again were heard yesterday at Harborview Park. And finally, we must acknowledge that this conversation never really ends. Inclusion and equity require constant attention and improvement. There's no magic formula, and our best outcome is to be better tomorrow than we are today. This slide shows a simple flow chart that hopefully builds confidence that we intend to gauge the right resources and follow a progressive path to action. We don't intend this to be just a talking exercise, but rather through engagement of our impacted stakeholders, that meaningful actions will emerge. And this is a key comment: the actions must be meaningful, they must be constructive, and they have to deliver a measurable outcome. You'll also notice the built-in loops.
Dean,
this goes back.
Sorry, Dean, I'm just gonna, we're still on the first slide.
Oh, well, that's not going to work then.
Are you able to advance it?
I'm going to try. Let's see if I can get things back to where they need to be.
There. Yep, we got it, the flow chart. Good, thank you.
Did you? Okay. You still see that? Okay. All right. Okay, so sorry. So it shows a simple flow chart, and what we're trying to do is show that we don't intend this to be a talking exercise. We want meaningful actions to occur, and process will help us to do that. And you'll notice that the built-in loops, they go back to the point that this is an ongoing and constant process of education and improvement. Can everybody see slide 4 okay? So the first step is the step we're on right now. We need to actively listen to what is being said by the public demonstrations, by all of the contact we've received, and at this council meeting tonight. Staff have also put together a community engagement exercise called the Doorway Project. I'm just going to flip to another slide. Hopefully you can see it. There we go. So this was inspired by a suggestion that Councillor Comey had made, and with gratitude for the help and support provided by Georgian Bay Woodworking, 4 standalone doors will be placed in 4 different locations in the community this week. Alongside each door will be a request for people to constructively share their voice regarding a future free from racism, a future that is on the other side of a door that we all need to build together. Staff are also exploring the use of such tools as an ideas crowdsourcing instrument known as Thought Exchange and our own Engage Collingwood platform. Most importantly of all, staff will be reaching out to the community for participation in a resource group named the Gathering Circle. This will be a cross-section of our community. The Alwyn Gathering Place at Harborview Park was designed as a representation of a traditional gathering circle at the center of an Indigenous village. To ensure that we were using this gathering circle concept correctly in trying to apply it to this program, I reached out to Elder Duke Redberg last week for advice. He confirmed that a traditional gathering circle was intended to have each member speaking on even ground with all of the others, and that at the center of the circle was a campfire that provided warmth. All could access this warmth equally and survive together as a result. While this step in the process is largely about listening, the action of pulling together this gathering circle will provide a source of information and be instrumental in the next steps as well. In step 2, as we continue to listen to our impacted stakeholders, we will also reach out for additional information to aid our learning. Through the voices we hear from the community, we hope to discover new resources that we might not have been able to find on our own. Collingwood's updated strategic plan also includes guidance towards measurement tools and annual events that celebrate diversity. These will be opportunities to learn even more. And you'll notice that this slide is quite bare, and that's because listening to the community and learning from what we hear, that has just begun. And this might be where the town of Collingwood chooses to engage the upper tiers of government, or where it's decided that local actions are a priority, or both. We look forward to finding specific actions that make a difference and are impactful through collaboration with stakeholders. And we won't waste time. We need to get here sooner than later. Similarly bare, this slide represents the measurement tools and the insights that will be provided by the action this process generates. These insights will be the fuel that continues to cycle the process and help us to continuously improve. This doesn't require perfection, it requires intention. This will not break the community down, it will build it up, and it won't weaken us. Equality and inclusion will make us stronger. The world can be said to be all together in a dark tunnel these days, but I have to believe that we also all see the light at the end of this tunnel. If we come together, we'll find our way out. I want to end by saying, on a personal note, that the intensity of the past several weeks has caused me to look inward as an obvious beneficiary of white privilege. It's not an easy thing to do, but racism won't end until we understand its source and acknowledge that the potential exists within all of us. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dean. Council, are there any questions or comments for Executive Director Culver about the presentation we just received? Seeing none, we look forward to going through this process and working with our community to determine the way forward. So thank you for that. Councillor McLeod, you'd like to speak?
Just for a second to acknowledge the final sentence that Director Culver gave us there. And I think that he is not alone, and I hope he's even less alone in acknowledging his privilege. That's all.
Thank you. So there's no action required on that item, and we will look forward to hearing back from staff on the progress of that important process. So the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which is item 7. And it is moved by Councillor Comey and seconded by Councillor Madigan. Be it resolved that the general consent agenda, having been given due consideration by council, be received. Item 7.1, proclamation, La Journée des Franco-Ontarian Flag Day, 25th of September. 7.2, Craigleaf Manor, support for the South Georgian Bay Tourism Recovery and Resiliency Development Plan. And 7.3, downtown Collingwood BIA, request for funding for farmers market. So I will call the vote initially to receive the items, and then I will ask if there's any that would like, people that would like to pull them. So starting with the motion first, all in favor of receiving? That is carried unanimously. Are there any items that would council members would like to pull? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. On my agenda, I'd like to pull 7.4.
I think you mean 7.3, the BIA item. It's on I'm using the new numbering under the amended agenda that I got, but in any event, I know what you mean. You want to speak to the BIA item? Go ahead, please.
Please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak through you, if I may, to my fellow councillors and to staff, just to provide a little bit more information, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions or provide additional feedback as it relates to this matter as your BIA representative. So for a period of time now, the BIA has operated the farmers market downtown. And I put that out there first because I just want to make sure that those who are maybe watching or following along at home understand that the BIA, this is their project, and it is their way of driving people to the community on a Saturday morning. And for a number of years in support, the town has played just what I said, a supportive role. And one of the things that we've done is we've provided in-kind services, i.e. with the free use of the parking lot, for example. So in the last month or so, as a result of COVID, the time of year, et cetera, the BIA has had to go through a series of things and a series of decisions. And they all sort of come back to the 2020 budget. So last week, the SIC committee received the budget presentation from the BIA, and it was passed by your council or by council. And I just wanted to draw to your attention, within that budget, there was a line item to a dollar amount of $190,000. The original conversation that the BIA was having, and in fact, when the BIA, along with a whole host of other community organizations, were asked to come and speak to the COVID task force about how COVID is affecting your organization, your group, et cetera, and how could potentially this task force of the community support you. We wanted to hear from them. So the BIA was a part of that. And when they were looking at putting their budget together, and they were looking at, sort of the nuts and bolts of the things that they must do to keep their organization running, and then the things that they wanted to do in terms of being able to enhance and promote the downtown, and then some of the things that they thought they needed to do in a response to COVID to ensure that when we come out of this on the other side, that they were welcoming people downtown to a vibrant, accessible downtown that was full of life and full of animation, et cetera. The reality is that as with COVID, that's just not going to happen, because there are so many restrictions as it relates to gatherings, social distancing, those types of things. despite what's happening south of the border, we know that things like festivals, et cetera, just aren't going to be a part of the equation for this coming summer and potentially beyond. And so that's had a real effect on the BIA and the town, because we do look forward to certain things. Side Launch Day is a perfect example of that, where we can all come down and celebrate our heritage, celebrate the water, enjoy the downtown, enjoy the harbor, that type of thing. And of course, the market is a big part of that. So the 190,000, the discussion there was that they would pull those monies out of their reserve. But there was discussion about coming to the municipality and in fact actually asking for 95,000 or half of that from us. And after much discussion, and I applaud the BIA, they made a very tough decision that it was their downtown, it was their tax assessment, it was their businesses, and that they felt it was important in ensuring that they supported their membership through COVID and as we come out of COVID, and I may be premature in saying that, that they decided that they would move forward with those expenditures. There were 5 items for a sum of 190, and that they would pay forward all of their reserves. The part of the conversation was that they knew that there would be additional costs coming down the road as it related to some programming. And one of them is the market. So looking at the market, you know, they've run this now very successfully for a number of years. They know how to run it. They know what the costs are, et cetera. But now with COVID in place, they are looking at some additional costs related to things like signage, fencing, potentially security. I'm going to drop that word security. I'm going to use the word ambassador. But in order to run a market, they need to put some of these things in place. And some of them are a little bit moving because the health unit is telling us one thing, the province is telling us another. And what we're being told today and what we're looking at today, it continues to evolve. And the conversation 3 weeks from now might be very different. But the data that you received today in the letter that was written over the weekend and signed by the chair, or for the dollar amounts that they're looking for your consideration to help support the market for this summer. And I will let the CAO answer this question because she's been having very good conversations with the GM. But my understanding, and I stand to be corrected, is that the BIA staff are in a position to get going with the market. And they are prepared to move forward, and it could be something that they're prepared to move forward with Saturday, a week Saturday the 27th. They fully understand that there are some constraints. They fully understand that it's fluid, and they want to do it properly. And therefore, in pulling this tonight, you have an opportunity, I think, maybe to do a couple of things. 1, dismiss it outright. 2, approve it outright tonight. Or 3, maybe refer it to staff so that they could take a look at the financial request and get back to us with the report next Monday. And maybe on that note, if I could, through you, Mayor Saunderson, go to the CAO and she could comment on sort of the timeline and how staff could assist in giving us better information.
Sonia?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the Deputy Mayor. Yes, I've had a good conversation with the Executive Director at the BIA, Sue Nicholson, today, and with several of our staff. And there's a few items in this request from the BIA that cause me no concern whatsoever. Things like having masks on hand and, you know, potentially hand sanitizer and some of the arrangements that they'd like to make. There are a few, however, that I think we need some comment on, potentially from the health unit, and Sue indicated her willingness even to reach out today. Some of the requests are based on what the health unit had mentioned a week or 2 ago, things like full fencing, the ambassadors there to remind people, which are in fact the majority of the costs. With the fencing running from over $3,000 to over $13,000, depending on a buy or rent scenario, and the ambassadors running toward $9,000. While council could make any decision today, I did think that it might be worth a short pause just to look into whether those were the absolute best use of these funds from a town perspective to support downtown businesses, and in fact businesses across the community. And there's a few other minor considerations we might want to look into, but that's sort of where I am thinking at the moment today.
Thank you, Sonia. Deputy Mayor, do you want to put an option on the table for council's consideration?
If I was to put something on the table, the option that I would select would be to refer it to staff to come back with a report next Monday night. Okay, and I think I'm seeing heads nod. I'm not sure we need, well, let's get a seconder and pass it on to staff then. Councillor Jeffrey, you got your hand up. Do you second that? All right then. So we've got a motion on the table to direct staff to look into the request from the BIA to support the farmers market. And I will call the vote. All in favor? Councillor Hamlin, you have something to say?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had one comment on the letter that is part of this item. And one of the requests is for fencing, and there's a comparison between seasonal rental or purchase. So I just wanted to offer to staff when they're reviewing this item to consider the costs of storage if there's a mind to buy the fencing. Because I know that the cost of storage for other things that the BIA has and uses on a seasonal basis is quite hefty. So it might shift the analysis once storage is taken into account. That was all.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Moving on then from the consent agenda to standing committee reports. 8.1, the corporate and community services. So the first motion, it's moved by Councillor MacLeod and seconded by Councillor Comey. Be it resolved, the council received the corporate and community services standing committee report from its meeting held June 1, 2020, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. PRC 2020-6 floating breakwall recommendation to approve the funds required for the construction of a floating breakwall. PRC 2020-7 special events plan in response to COVID-19. And the recommendation is that council approve the revised PRC special event plan for 2020 and that council approve the use of budgets currently allocated to the Collingwood Festival for Canada, side launch days, and the Collingwood Live and Original Music Initiative to implement the revised 2020 PRC special event plan. Before I call the vote, I'll see if Chair MacLeod has anything she'd like to speak to in this motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we had a fulsome discussion on these items, and I support their moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, and as these items were passed unanimously, we are moving forward on the consent basis. Councillor Comey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I see Acting Director Milanovic on the line. And before we vote on the break wall, I just want to re-emphasize the enthusiasm Mr. George Christie has for any potential ability to salvage the yacht club's old break wall, if that's the direction they go. I work in my front garden a lot, and he's very enthusiastic about this. So I'm just going to re-impart that request to you.
Yeah, I'll go through the mill. I understand that the break wall is the property of the yacht club, so I guess the first dibs goes to the yacht club personnel. Mel, do you have anything to add to that?
Through your worship, it's been heard, and we will look forward to receiving the wave break. And if the Collingwood Yacht Club doesn't want it, and repurpose it.
Good.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated.
All right. Are there any other comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. So that brings us to Standing Committee Report, Strategic Initiative Standing Committee, June 3, 2020. So the Deputy Mayor is moving this First recommendation, 8.2.1, which is being seconded by Councillor McLeod. And it's be it resolved that Council received a Strategic Initiative Standing Committee report from its meeting held June 3, 2020, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. T2020-6, 2019 Statement of Development Charge and Cash in lieu of Parkland Reserve Funds. Recommendation to receive for information. T2020-7, Final Tax Rates. Recommendation to enact bylaw to provide for levy and collection of 2020 tax levies against all rateable property in the town of Collingwood. T2020-8, Financial Update, including COVID-19 considerations. Recommendation to approve the continued deferral of penalties and interest until August 31, and that is on the property taxes. CAO 2020-5, Community-Based Strategic Plan Refresh. Recommended that 2020-2023 Strategic Plan be approved to approve the proposed Community-Based Strategic Plan Refresh. And 2020 Collingwood Downtown BIA Budget. Susan Nicholson, General Manager, was a verbal update, and the recommendation is to receive the 2020 Collingwood Downtown BIA budget and pass a 2020 BIA tax rate bylaw. These items were all passed unanimously at the committee, so they're being done in this bundle format. Are there any items that somebody wishes to pull for other than comment before I call the vote? Seeing none. The only comment I have is that I'm very excited that the community-based strategic plan refresh has been done. This has been an important process for us to focus our energies and our priorities for the next 2.5 years. And I look forward to working with staff to make our priorities happen. That being said, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And those items are received unanimously. Thank you. The next motion is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that staff report CAO 2020-4 review of action plan recommended by the Economic Support and Recovery Task Force be received, and further that Council endorses the instruction to staff contained in the staff recommendations for items 1 to 6 documented in this report, aside from action item 2 part 4 and action item 5 detailed below. And further that Council endorses an official letter of recognition being sent to the 14 task force members by the mayor. So those, what we're looking at now are the items that were approved unanimously at the SIC, and we have pulled out the ones that were on a divided vote for consideration individually. So are there any comments or questions about the motion on the floor? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So the next motion, then we're breaking out the items that were not passed unanimously. And so the first one we're dealing with is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that staff investigate a Collingwood investment fund concept as part of the Economic Development Action Plan. And this is action item 2 of part 4. Are there any questions or comments before I call the vote? Go ahead, Councillor McLeod.
I would prefer not to be the seconder on this, please.
Okay, so can I have another seconder for this? Councillor Jeffrey? All right, so it's now moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor Jeffrey. Any other questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Duly noted, and that is carried. The next item is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall, and it's also seconded by you, Councillor McLeod. Would you prefer not to second this one as well?
That is correct.
Okay, I'll look to Councillor Berman. Thank you. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall, seconded by Councillor Berman. Be it resolved that the following recommendations to action item 5, shop local incentive, be approved. 1, the council approve funding from the following for the following initiative from the $2.5 million Collingwood Emergency Contingency Fund that was approved at the March 25, 2020 special meeting of the Town of Collingwood Council. And 2, the council approve up to $2,500 for further planning efforts, including investing, or I guess retaining a consultant to evaluate the feasibility of promotional cash card campaign in Collingwood residents redeemable at eligible participating businesses located in the municipality. Questions or comments before I call the vote, Council? Councillor Comey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. I just want to take one more opportunity to reiterate to any task force, economic task force members that might be watching, how much I supported the spirit behind this idea, this concept. I think it was put forward with the very best of intentions. I won't be supporting moving forward with the consultation because really as a complement to our staff report that we received, it was for me, for these 3 particular reasons that I felt I couldn't agree to move forward. It was that 400 out of 3,299 businesses were estimated to be eligible. It was the fixed cost of approximately $136,000 to basically get the cards out the door. And in particular, the 500 staff hours that were estimated in the staff report to further administer the program. But truly my thanks to the sentiment behind it from the task force. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor MacLeod?
Thank you. I'd like to echo Councillor Comey's comments. I think that this particular idea is very well spirited and well intentioned, but I can't support it because of the 20% of our residents, as delineated in our staff report, who will not be covered by this largesse.
Thank you for that. Any other comments, Council? Seeing none, I'll call the, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Through you, if I can just speak to Councillor MacLeod. When this initiative was discussed with the action team, it was recognized that there were complications in attempting to cover every single solitary household in the community. At the same time, the action team was adamant that we need to cover as many people as we possibly can. And even just speaking for myself as one member of the task force, I think it's critical that as many people as possible, and I'm talking like in the 98, 99% of households in the community should be able to participate in this program. And part of this $2,500 investment would be, I'm assuming, having spoken to the director, will be to explore the complications and to ensure that we will have full participation or virtually full participation in this program or not move ahead with it. So I'm very supportive of the additional investment to explore not only the entire implementation, but this particular ability of the program to access every household in the community.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. I'm going to go around the table before I come back to you, Councillor MacLeod. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, Councillor MacLeod, go ahead.
Thank you. In response to Councillor Doherty, well, that would change my vote. Can a staff member speak to this? Through you, Your Worship?
Yes, do we have Director Ridlow with us tonight?
Mr. Mayor, this is Adam Farr here.
Oh, hi, Adam.
Planning it. I apologize, my camera's not working. Martin's not on the call tonight, but the intent here was to explore the program's viability in its totality in a comprehensive fashion to get some expert opinion, not just on the question of the total subscription rate for the program, but on the overall implementability and design of the program. So in that respect, the recommendation kind of stands on its own to address all of those issues.
Does that assist, Councillor MacLeod?
Could I ask for a bit more clarification? The staff report was pretty clear that 20% or so of our residents who are not on our tax rolls would be excluded. Is that no longer the case, or is that we are going to the staff report is going to find ways to include those residents?
Director Farr?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to respond to Councillor MacLeod's question. Yes, in fact, it would explore that. It explores the program in its totality, including the cost effectiveness, subscription rates, and considers this 20% that in the first go around didn't look like they would be covered. So it's looking at different ways of delivering the benefit for its originally intended purpose, and that was to try to provide Collingwood residents with an ability to spend funds in local businesses. So the answer in short is yes.
Thank you very much.
All right. With that new information then, I am going to call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Duly noted, and that is carried. And I think that brings us then to 8.4 bylaws. And the first bylaw, it's 8.4 by 0.1. There we go. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall, seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-37, being a bylaw to set the tax rates and levy taxes for the year 2020, be enacted and passed this 15th day of June 2020. Are there any questions or comments before I call the vote? This is just a bylaw to enact what was actually passed under our strategic initiatives consent agenda. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And the next one is bylaw 2020-38. It is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-38, being a bylaw to provide for the levy and collection of sums required by the Collingwood Downtown Business Improvement Area for the year 2020, be enacted and passed this 15th day of June 2020. Questions or comments? Seeing none, I will call the vote then. All in favor? Thank you. And that brings us to item 9, which is staff reports. There was a staff report that we received just fairly late this afternoon. It's C 2020-7 patio and parking lot and street closure report. And I think that it is going to the clerk's department, Sarah, so I'll pass it over to you.
Certainly, through your worship, to all of council. We have been working tirelessly actually over the past week with regards to the development of the policy and the background to a number of initiatives, but we have been reaching out and working with the patio community ever since the COVID pandemic started. And patios have been a large component of our deputy clerk's life over the past decade. And she has really held the leadership role with regards to this. So she was leading our department head team through conversations with numerous agencies within our town departments, working together with the number of businesses, knowing that the recommendation from the task force for the economic support recovery just came forward and was just approved tonight. This is a means to implement a number of those pilot ideas. So with having said that, I would ask Becky to take us through the staff report And knowing that council hasn't had much opportunity to review this, we're able to go through the details of it tonight of what's being proposed and the delegated authorities that we're looking at, speed reductions. We do have all department heads on board, so if there's any specific questions that do come up within another department's area, we're able to address. We also had a very short turnaround for the public feedback that we received through the BIA and the Chamber's circulation of some questions that pertain to both public property encroachments as well as extensions to businesses that have large private properties that they want to expand on. So at that, I will ask Becky to share her screen and take us through the staff report.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Go ahead,
Sarah.
Becky.
So through the chair to the council, it's my first time sharing my screen, so I apologize if I have some technical issues, but here we go. Okay. All right, I first want to start off by just saying thank you so much to the public and the business owners for their patience. I totally understand that this is a frustrating time. They want to get going. They want to start earning some money. They want to provide their services to the public. And this week has been really challenging with all the different actions that have taken place. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for all their patience, and hopefully we'll get them going as soon as we can. So the purpose of this report is to provide some more flexibility with how we can expand our merchandising downtown areas. In the downtown, we're currently restricted with our patio and merchandise bylaw, which doesn't allow them to expand onto the parking areas, or it's quite restrictive in the materials that they have to use and whatnot. So this bylaw is coming out of action number 4 of the task force recommendations, and it's to provide a flexibility to the businesses in the downtown to expand the operation of their businesses onto municipal property while maintaining and potentially enhancing pedestrian space throughout the downtown. We also talk in here a little bit about private property. We've had a lot of requests from patio owners on private property on how they can also expand their patios with the announcements made last week by the province. So the background, we've kind of hit on it. This is coming forward because of the restrictions of COVID with physical distancing, and action item 4, which talks about 3 pilot projects that were introduced. One was the closure of Simcoe Street through Thursday to Saturdays weekly. Another one was removal of angled parking for significant stretch of Ontario and expanding pedestrian and patio spaces. And the third one was to consider the closure of Ontario Street from 2nd to 3rd throughout the summer months. So I'll kind of just skim through the background here. Some of the major changes that happened last week, obviously, was the reopening of stage 2 and a lot of businesses being able to expand their services to the public. The one we're focusing on today is the allowance for patios. So the restaurant owners can now have seated areas for their customers. And they're also allowed to continue with their takeout and their delivery service, obviously. Throughout the week, different regulations kept changing. The AGCO downloaded some of their requirements onto the municipality. So people that have a current liquor license aren't required to apply for a temporary extension through the AGCO. They just have downloaded to the municipality saying the municipality will provide you with a non-objection letter if they feel it's appropriate. And they've also changed their fencing requirements. So it used to be a certain height requirement of certain materials to delineate liquor areas. And this has now been not lifted, but some leniencies provided to that in types of material. There's no longer a height restriction for the type of material that's provided. We talked to various stakeholders. I had conversations with the OPP, the health unit, Alcohol Gaming Association. We've written to the Accessibility Directorate of Ontario, but we have not heard back yet. We've talked to our municipal solicitor, all our departments, and we've also consulted with the BIA and the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber wasn't able to get their questions out to their membership until this morning, so we're a little late getting those ones back, but we've had lots of correspondence received back from the BIA membership. And with patio licensing encroaching onto the roads, there's a number of different pieces of legislation we have to be aware of. They're all listed in the report. I won't bore you with that. So the analysis section. So we've broken out the 3 pilot projects into 3 different analysis. What we're asking for to help us kind of streamline and speed up the approval process for the extension onto municipal property is to put our current patio and merchandise bylaw on hold and enact a bylaw that delegates authority to Sarah and I to enter into encroachment permits with whoever wants to utilize a parking space for extension of a patio, for example, or if we're looking to close a road to provide additional space for merchandise and patios to go onto. I'll just kind of go back to, so we'll start with pilot 2, which is the removing of the on-street parking. With the comments that we got coming in throughout the weekend, it seemed that the biggest push through the community and visitors wanting to come to Collingwood and the business owners is to accommodate restaurants as best as we can. So the patios that are allowed on the sidewalk currently will only accommodate 2 tables at best for most of them. So if we allow them the ability to expand both onto the street and across their neighbors, if their neighbors are agreeable to that, it will provide them with additional seating. With the space that we have, they still won't be able to have the same capacity as they did pre-COVID, but at least it gives them more opportunity to get up and running and get going again. So this is quite an in-depth report.
You're doing great.
So one of the pieces that's here within this pilot 2, we also expand to talk about the private property piece as well. Yeah. So that this piece has been incorporated into the report based on planning services abilities to alter approved site plans, ensuring that zoning is maintaining compliance. So one of the requests today would also be allowing a delegation of authority piece to the Director of Planning Services to review any sort of minor amendments to site plans for a temporary purpose. So that will capture some of the properties that are outside of the downtown that we're getting numerous requests on.
Yeah. So that's the difference between the private and the public properties. The private properties have other legislation they have to adhere to, and the biggest obstacles are the Planning Act regulations with respect to zoning and site plan that's already in place. So to keep going with the public property, if we are going to allow the patios to extend in the on-street parking, staff is recommending that the speed limit be reduced to 40 kilometers an hour. This has been reviewed with the OPP and they think that's sufficient enough. Just to slow down the traffic, you know, people are going to be closer to the roadway and whatnot. If we are going to allow the patios to extend into the parking areas as well, they'll need a 3-foot setback from any moving traffic as well. So we'll determine where that line would fall on the road, depending on what road they're on. The report also talks about the closure of on-street parking for restaurants on here Ontario Street, but as you can see, the Caesar Bar was quite active in getting comments back, so we know that we'll get requests for side streets as well. So we'll be accompanying these in this bylaw, hopefully, if it's approved tonight as well. For fencing requirements, so we were hoping to meet with the Heritage Committee this morning, but unfortunately they were not able to achieve quorum, so they weren't able to meet. Our issue with the fencing requirements is that in the Heritage District Conservation Plan, it's required to be of a black iron material. So we're asking Council tonight to provide a temporary exemption from that requirement and delegate authority to Sarah and I to make any decision on what materials would be used, and looking at the cost of those materials too to help it keep it low for the restaurant owners. We'd obviously keep in mind heritage type materials and aesthetics when we're doing those approvals. Another thing that we'll have to keep in mind too, when we allow these on-street parking, is the town still requires to purchase the required bollards with the reflective materials on them and a temporary curb stop to prevent moving traffic from being able to get into these areas as well. We're still waiting to hear from the Accessibility Directorate on any requirements we need for accessibility and if these patios will require some kind of ramp or anything like that going into the curb area, or if we can classify their area that would remain on the sidewalk as their accessible patio. So with the use of the sidewalk, we also want to make sure that the retail industry is being heard. So we are hoping to make some changes to that as well. In our current bylaw, they're required to have their material under tents adjacent to the curb only on weekends. So we'd like to lift those restrictions and not have a tent and be allowed to put their merchandise on the sidewalk all week long in a designated area curbside. Currently, they're allowed to use the 2-foot area right in front of their business, as long as, and we've recommended they have like a hand sanitizer or something that people could wash their hands with if they prefer to before they're touching their products that they're wanting to sell. So those are our recommendations for the pilot 2 for our encroachment permit process that we're recommending. There are 2 bylaws that would need to be approved. One to delegate us the authority. It's called the encroachment permit bylaw, which would delegate Sarah and I the authority to take a look at all these requests on a case-by-case basis and give them a permit with terms and conditions that they'd have to adhere to, and making sure they're fully aware of all the requirements provided under the province and the health unit for COVID. And we'd also be requesting the temporary exemption for the fencing requirements in the heritage plan, and the delegated authority to the director of planner to provide minor variances with any site plans that could cause an issue with patio expansions on private property. So I guess I'll put it on the floor there if there's any questions with that part of it before we move on to the Simcoe Street closure pilot.
Thank you, Becky. Deputy Mayor, I saw your hand up, so go ahead, please.
Thank you. Through you to the Deputy Clerk. I had an email come in from one of our BIA members just prior. And I apologize if I didn't see it just in glancing over the report or missed it, but is it possible in one of these scenarios that a non-restaurant owner could support a restaurant owner by having a patio out front of their store, but they're not physically next door, so they may be 3 doors down?
Through the chair to the deputy mayor, I don't think that they would be allowed to do that. And the reason for that is the AGCO still requires a liquored area to be adjacent to their permanent business. So their liquor license wouldn't carry if it was that far away from their property.
So through you, Mayor Saunderson, just to follow up.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify. So if it's an establishment that is selling liquor, it has to be the adjacent building.
That's
but potentially what you're saying is that one of our non-licensed establishments that does have food could potentially have a patio that's 3 doors down.
They could, yeah, if they had the right, if they got the approval from the property or the business that would be affected in writing, then we could definitely look at that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just a couple comments. This is really great work, and I know we have the other part to get to, but 2 things that have come to mind for me is, and I mean, this is great work. I love it, is accessibility and our goals with accessibility in the downtown and maintaining that for our residents. And then the bike enforcement of no bikes in the downtown. I think we're really going to have to ramp that up, given a lot of extra activity within the sidewalks and potentially the parking areas in the downtown. And when the time's right, I'd love to move it.
Okay.
Yeah, so through
Duly
the chair
noted.
to Councillor Jeffrey, we will be maintaining that 2-meter pedestrian walkway with every approval that we do. That is a condition that will be in every single permit issued.
Thank you. Councillor Hamlin, and then I will circle around before I come back to you, Deputy Mayor, since you've already commented once. Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our Deputy Clerk. Could you just explain to me what the restrictions are that were mentioned by Councillor Jeffrey to do with no bikes in the downtown? What is that about?
I think they're referring to no riding the bikes on the sidewalk. And, so it's a road restriction. Okay. So people will have to walk their bikes and put them in appropriate places just so that we can keep access from all the storefronts. I think that's what Councillor Jeffrey was referring to.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
That was, thank you.
Deputy Mayor, seeing no other comments. Are there any other comments before I go back to the Deputy Mayor? Seeing none, go ahead, Keith.
That was my question of clarification.
Okay.
Your worship?
Yeah, okay. You're not on my screen, Councillor Doherty, but go ahead.
Thank you. And I can't figure out, I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to get onto your screen. All I can see is the shared document. However, first of all, thank you so much to staff for putting such a comprehensive document together so quickly. I can just imagine how much work was involved. I see that we're going to loosen the restrictions and the guidelines relative to fencing. Now, both the BIA and our heritage bylaw have been very careful to preserve the beauty and integrity of the look of our downtown. So I'm just wondering if we're going to have some kind of limitations on the kind of fencing that applicants can put up, because like in my mind I'm envisioning, you know, every color under the rainbow and every kind of style. Will there be any kind of guidelines there so that, let's say, they must all be black or some such?
Through the chair to Councillor Doherty, yeah, what we'll be looking at is we'll prefer black, obviously, because it is going along with the heritage feel. Other considerations that we've been thinking of are like a raw rope system kind of thing with the black poles, something that's, you know, cognizant of our shipyard heritage and our downtown, and just giving that natural feel. We wouldn't be approving any kind of like galvanized steel or something that's, you know, bulky and out of place. We'd be very cautious on, you know, making sure it's still in line with the heritage requirements.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to the next? Go ahead, Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know the screen's a little different. I had a hard time finding my mute. Thank you so much. So through you to Deputy Clerk Dahl, also just seconding everyone's comments. This is so thorough, and I know you worked so hard on it. And of course, we're all trying to digest it all, you know, with a little less notice than usual, but completely respecting the reasons why. So as I'm scanning through all the comments you got from residents, further to your point, there does seem to be an abundance that speaks in particular to the Caesar Bar, who I know had a unique request. Does this bylaw encompass your ability to work with them on their ask?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Comey, it definitely does. We'd have to work out some things. I haven't gotten a furniture layout from them yet, just to kind of see how they'll maintain that physical distancing separation. But I think it's definitely something that we can work with.
Okay, that's great to hear. And as a follow-up, through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess to Director Slama, because, you know, whenever I hear comments as strongly worded as no bikes in the downtown, and we have concerns about people riding their bikes, the second thought I get, though, is also, how are we doing with our bike racks? I mean, are we really thinking along the lines of possibly needing more bike parking as our residents are more inclined to head downtown using their bikes, but then needing somewhere to lock it up safely?
Director Slama.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through you to Councillor Comey. We will be installing the bike racks, and I think that's a good consideration. We can look at the opportunities to provide additional bike racks, and we can also use some of the idea of coming forward with like the pilots and seeing how things go, or how the community adjusts with these opportunities for expanded patios and the other options we're considering.
Okay, I appreciate that, because they think, so we're picturing someone, they got their bike and maybe they want to touch something at the store, and then we've got a bike leaning up against a patio railing or a table. And then in a COVID world, that's not so great either. So, maybe some massive bike parking setups, like we've seen at the farmers market in years past, like almost a bike valet sort of setup was really awesome. So I'm sure there's lots of people who have ideas on that. So thank you so much.
Okay. Seeing no other comments then, Becky, I think you're good to go on to the next section, please.
Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is what we were calling Pilot 1, a temporary closure of Simcoe Street. We had a lot of discussion on this today, so it might slightly change from what's being presented here today, but we're going to give it a go anyway. So moving forward with the Simcoe Street pilot, one of the things that we'd really want to make sure before anything is that every business and affected residents contacted and no one has any objections. If they do have any objections, how can we work around them if it's respect with access to the property or whatnot? So the plan that I'll show you in just a minute might change slightly depending on those comments received. There was a chiropractor that indicated his concerns with closing off the street completely, so we'd have to look into that. The weekends that we're recommending to do as a pilot project to see if it's worthwhile continuing throughout the summer are June 26th to 28th and July 2nd to 5th. I'll bring up the map here as I'm kind of talking. So things that we'll have to consider before the closure is obviously providing the notice that I just talked about and the consent from everyone to move forward with it. There are some things that need to happen ahead of time. We need to get the materials to close the road, ensure all of our emergency services are notified. If there's any garbage collections that we have to worry about during that time, rerouting of our transit system, because there's a bus that runs along Simcoe Street there, it stops in front of the library. I'm just going to pull up, sorry. Did I miss anything? Yeah, so the idea is to provide our fire route like we would do in any of our events that we had downtown. The fire department requires a 20-foot lane and prefers it to be down the middle of the road. So what I'm proposing is that anyone that's wanting to encroach onto the sidewalk or the street stay within that blue area adjacent to their business. So it provides everyone with a business along there the ability to expand. There'll be the pedestrian walkway with a bike path in the middle should anyone want to travel down the street, and that's a 20-foot area. So I think that gives us lots of space to fool around with, providing a bike lane and the pedestrian walkway. For the restaurants, if they do stay adjacent to their business, so Prime 79, Moguls, the brewery, what else is there? Juice, I don't think they serve alcohol. Espresso Post, who doesn't serve alcohol, and Lowdown. As long as they're staying adjacent to their property, they can extend their patios quite extensively, I think, during this time period. And if we do provide some flexibility with the type of fencing used, when the road closure opens back up again, then the patios would need to reconsider their patio lines and possibly moving their fences in a little bit. So with that, we're suggesting to move ahead with the pilot on those weekends, pending further consultation with all affected parties. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Becky. Council, questions on the second part? All right.
Your worship, sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Can't see you. Just a comment that the notion of a dedicated bike lane down the middle of the street is like music to my ears.
All right.
Through your worship, I do have one thing, if I could speak.
Yes, go ahead, Sarah, please.
Certainly. So just for further clarification, in consultation with Director Ridlow and staff today, there was further correspondence just confirming the dates that the Simcoe Street closure would look at occurring in. So it would actually be the Thursday. So it would be Thursday morning right through to the Sunday. So it would be June 25th to the 28th, and then the July 2nd to 5th. And staff right now, we are looking at the easiest and most attainable closure to begin with is the area of Simcoe Street that is east of St. Marie Street. And then we will be working with the other property owners along that stretch between St. Marie and here, Ontario, to determine how best that would work. So maybe the first pilot might just be the one stretch for the first weekend until we get those details figured out. But that will be something that we will be evaluating as we move forward.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for that. Council, any questions or comments on what we just heard? Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. The second time period of July 2nd to 5th, the first, of course, is the holiday. And I'm just wondering, given the usual interest in people being out and about on that day, whether any consideration was given to closing the streets from the 1st.
Becky?
This was something that we talked about really quickly today. I don't know that if there's any special events going on July 1st to bring a draw, and I'd have to confirm with the businesses if they're going to be open on July 1st as well. So we can definitely keep it in mind when I'm doing my consultation with everybody, but I'd have to do some more work into that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. I actually had some questions on the last round and I didn't get acknowledged. And I wonder if it would be okay if I could have those answered.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So I just want to have it very clear in my head regarding the first section here is that we're proposing to remove some, but not all angle parking to accommodate bigger patios. And also allowing any kind of fences to make that happen as approved by the clerk and the deputy clerk. And also for retailers to put their goods out on the sidewalks any day, not just on weekends and not necessarily under a tent. Is that capturing basically the three things that are included in that first half, or did I miss something?
Becky?
Through the chair to Councillor McLeod, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking at. Mm-hmm.
Through you, Your Worship, thank you so very much for this excellent report. And I had a question as well regarding the second segment here.
Go ahead.
And thank you. So through Your Worship, to either the clerk or the deputy clerk, we're thinking this is happening St. Marie to the end of Simcoe 2 times only, starting Thursday noonish and till Sunday noonish, but it's 2 times, right?
2
times, and then they're reporting back on the experiment. Go ahead, Becky.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor McLeod, that's our plan. Okay. Again, I need to consult with all the affected parties to make sure that they're all game for this to go ahead, but that's our intent. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just want to be really clear what I'm voting on. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not seeing everybody, so if I'm not getting you, just speak up. I can hear you even if I can't see you. So I just want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered and has an opportunity to comment. All right, so not hearing, then I will read in the resolution. It might take a minute. It's fairly long, but
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Becky.
There's a pilot. There's a part 3. And
part 3. Oh, all right, go ahead.
So pilot 3 was a temporary closure of here Ontario Street between 2nd and 3rd. With the comments that I've received to date, there was concern expressed by some of the business owners within this blocked area of it being closed. They feel that they lose the flowing traffic and the acknowledgement that they're there. There was a further comment from the paint store down the street that was recently in Peterborough on the weekend that tried to do a similar thing. And he took various photos. It was quite interesting that when they arrived, the street was open. It was full of people and cars and whatever. they closed the street off to do a pedestrian walkway, and there was no one there. So that was kind of interesting too. So I think before we proceeded with that one, we'd want to definitely look into it a bit further and get more input from all the affected parties. For the last bit, because this is all being changed due to COVID and what's happening with the world today, we're requesting $40,000 be put aside from the COVID relief fund to cover all the costs associated with these pilot projects. I don't have exact numbers because it's only been a couple of days since we've been working on it and we can't get those numbers in quite yet. But I'm fairly confident the projects could be done under this amount. It'd be the purchase of the rental for the curb stops and bollards for the road closures and on-street parking closures, the required signage for the road closures, speed reduction and safety precautions, any communications and monitoring of the parking and road closures that we'd want to have done, including any business surveying, unplanned staff overtime where necessary for night closures, installation of bollards, and any legal fees associated with any of the bylaws and stuff that we've created. The individual businesses to date would be responsible for their fencing if they were to expand their patios. And that's it for me.
All right, thank you, Becky. Any questions on part 3? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did read with interest the letter from the gentleman who had been to Peterborough and took pictures of the main street. And I, of course, just heard our deputy clerk's comments. And I haven't been to Peterborough perhaps and examined its main street for 10 years. But before that, I was in Peterborough a fair amount. And I would just say Peterborough is a very different animal from our main street. And it often looks like you could shoot a cannon down it. So it does not have the same level of foot traffic or tourism that we do. And so I would, with respect to our person who wrote in, I would take that information with not too much faith in it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think what Becky indicated is we're going to do more research into that and make sure before we take any steps on pursuing that we've got a better temperature of our storefront retailers before we do that, but certainly it's something that's still a possibility. I had one question, Becky, for the reduced speed limit, what are we going to put up to, what kind of signage are we going to get out there to make sure people know that that's the case? Is it going to be flashing signage, or how are we going to draw people's attention to that?
Through the chair to council, I will leave that in Peggy Slama's area.
Okay.
I'm sure there's required signage under the Highway Traffic Act that we'll have to install.
Peggy?
Thank you. Yeah, we'll make sure that we're complying with any of the requirements with respect to that signage. There'll be some early indications of a change, and I can't say for certain if it'll be a flashing light, but we will make sure that we follow the proper protocol.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments then before I read in this motion? Seeing none, it is moved by Councillor Jeffrey and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that staff report C 2020-7 be received and the following recommendations approved. 1, the council enact and pass a bylaw to temporarily suspend patio and merchandise bylaw number 2021-30 and allow for encroachment permits through delegated authority to staff as provided in Appendix A. 2, the council enact and pass a bylaw to reduce the speed limit along Hurontario Street as provided in Appendix B. 3, that a temporary exemption from the fencing requirements outlined in the Collingwood Heritage District Plan specific to materials to be used for the purpose of providing expanded patios in the downtown while COVID-19 protocols remain in place be approved, and that staff be delegated authority to determine the appropriate fencing materials sympathetic to heritage objectives and reasonably priced to be used for the temporary patios in the downtown during such time. 4, that staff proceed with consulting with the affected businesses and residents along Simcoe Street between Hurontario and St. Paul Street, and if warranted, conduct a pilot closure of Simcoe Street between June 26th to 28th and July 2nd to 5th, and an update be provided at the July 8 SIC meeting to determine if the pilot project will continue. 5, that pilot 3, round bracket, full closure on a portion of Hurontario Street, end bracket, not be considered until consultation with all affected parties has been conducted and an evaluation of pilot 1 and pilot 2 has been completed. 6, that an upset limit of $40,000 be allocated out of the COVID-19 relief fund to cover costs associated and authorize the non-standard emergency purchases incurred by the town with the approved pilot projects. And that council delegate authority to the Director of Planning Services to provide minor variances to site plans to allow for temporary relief to permit extended patio and or merchandise displays during the COVID-19 recovery period on private property. And with that being read in, I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And thank you, Becky and Sarah, and all department heads for compiling that and getting that into a digestible and implementable stages for us. Thank you. All right, so that takes us now to motions. 10.1, the creation of a community foundation. This is a notice of motion moved by Councillor Berman. And I will pass it over to you, Councillor Berman, to read in your notice.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. It was moved by me and seconded by Councillor Madigan, I believe. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Whereas council, staff, and the town's economic support and recovery task force have acknowledged the value of the recently formed social services roundtable as an aid in identifying best practices, critical gaps in community services, and opportunities to leverage funding. And whereas the long-term funding and coordination of social services is not directly within the mandate of a local municipality, and whereas a community foundation is registered charity that creates and invests funds, the income of which is dispersed as grants for projects and services that enrich the community, and the town of Collingwood has identified the community foundation as a potential use of the asset sale proceeds. Now therefore be it resolved that council requests staff investigate the creation of a community foundation or similar entity, including a potential framework for governance and financial scope in advance of the final discussions on use of the asset sale proceeds.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Do you want to speak to your motion first?
Yeah, not much to say. I'm going back to a staff report that the treasurer gave us 2 months into our term, February 11th, 2019. And on the last page of the staff report, she or staff recommend a community foundation as one of the things that we should look at. And while there's been a lot of public input on what to do with the funds since then, council's yet to start their discussions. And I guess the CEO could tell us when, maybe roughly what quarter we're going to get to that or whatever. But I think this is, or what I'm trying to do here is educate us on something that we're likely to do anyhow. So why not get staff going and give them permission to get going on it first? But the horse before the cart, I think, would be the right way to do it. So the foundation has popped up in other staff reports since then, just reference. So it seems like this is something that we're going to have to look at. So why not let them get started at it now and then have the answers when it comes time to make decisions on the money. I can't really answer any questions because I know as much about it as anybody else, but through you to the CAO, I guess, my intent here was to do the sort of to look at the most responsible way to find out about this stuff before we go and divvy up the money. So that's all I'd have to say to it.
Okay, thank you. Sonia, do you want to speak to that?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Berman. I do think that should Council endorse this motion, it would be wonderful to fully understand the community foundation concept prior to making decisions on the asset sale funds. I think it would only make sense that everyone had a deep and common understanding of what that might be and how much funding could potentially make a difference in our community. There's quite a few things that are pointing toward this type of a change. There's the community-based, the community safety and well-being plan, requirement from the province. We have our social services roundtable that's come up through COVID, and a number of other things, potentially even the diversity and inclusion issues that could be enhanced and or supported through a community foundation type of investment. I'm not saying that it's a great idea. We haven't done the work yet, but the potential is there, and I think it would be good for council to understand the mechanisms and how it would work. Timing wise, I see that we would like to have some of that analysis done by September. Not promising, but I'm planning that would be on the table. There's a few new things happening over this summer that are going to keep things hopping, but we've got some pretty awesome staff who are good at this type of research and some really good community resources on this topic. And as well, I think that it is time to have brainstorming with council around your thoughts, not only receiving the reports on what the community has said about the asset sales, but getting some of your own input from a council member's perspective, potentially also in advance of making decisions. So that's just the overall concept as I see it, although I'm, of course, staff and I are willing to take your direction around priorities and timing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Council, any questions or comments? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in support of this motion. I do think it makes sense. And my comment is if staff could please consider when they're reviewing a community foundation structure, whether it makes sense that the community foundation include municipalities beyond our own. And I say this because I have observed that some of the philanthropists we see in our community, in fact, live in Clearview or have homes in Clearview or have homes in the town of the Blue Mountains. And I'd hate to see a number of different community foundations set up in this relatively small area, going after and hoping for support from, a limited number of individuals, at least to get it started. And also, as much as I understand community foundations, the more funds that you can attract to it, the better chance you have to invest those investments and make a higher return. I know some of the smaller community foundations, in fact, give their funds to the City of Toronto Community Foundation for that reason, but we may in fact be able to create a large enough one here. And the last thing I say in favor of this kind of approach is the closest community foundation to us really is the one for Grey Bruce. So, it's quite a ways away from all of our, in Owen Sound. So it's quite a ways away from our little center of the universe to where there's a lot of other municipalities. So that was my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. My question through you, Mr. Mayor, is to the CAO, and it begins with a comment. And we have an awful lot on our plate right now, and not to impugn our staff's abilities and enthusiasms, but holy cow, we have a lot on our plate right now. Is this really the time to be burdening our staff with yet a staff report? We approved 6 last week, I think it was, and another 2 today. So can we really is it really reasonable to be doing this? I'm not suggesting that we never do this, and I support it in principle, finding out what to do, but I just wonder if maybe the timing is not quite right. We're going to be making decisions. Really big things are coming our way, including a judicial inquiry response, and we have to have 500 hours of staff time as suggested in the staff report regarding these gift cards, and if we go ahead with that, and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if enthusiasm and aside, is it possible to even do this right now?
CEO Skinner.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor MacLeod. That's a wonderful question and one that keeps me up at night. I think that in my own mind, I am worried a bit about how much work staff is doing and the dedication. There's been a few extraordinary calls for service lately. COVID, diversity and inclusion, and COVID recovery all come to mind, but those are not the only ones. And I think a lot depends on the judicial inquiry and if that does roll out. And a little bit, I believe, depends on decisions that are yet to come from the Economic Task Force Recovery, things like the couponing initiative, and your decisions on those fronts. I know that you've just, and thank you for doing that, approved the strategic plan. So there's certainly an initiative that we need to do to calendar out the next set of steps related to the strategic plan. So what I'd like to say is thank you for raising the issue. If you could give us a few weeks, maybe past the June 22nd date, to come back with a calendarized approach of the highest priorities, I'd like to do that. I have no concerns with this motion as it stands, because it asks us to do something but doesn't tie us to a certain month, although I had suggested when I'd like to have it back on the table for you. So that's sort of where I'm thinking. Things are very busy. Thank you.
And so to follow, oh,
go ahead.
And so to follow up on that, I wonder if it might be prudent for us to move for a deferral of this to Labor Day, just to give our staff a time to breathe. And so I am making that motion.
Okay, bring a motion to defer. And do we have a seconder?
Okay.
I'm not seeing one, but I guess what I took from the CAO's comments is that we're looking at passing this motion on the understanding that as things progress and other things evolve, we may get a report from staff saying that the timeline is going to be later as opposed to sooner. So I think there's some flexibility built into that, as I understood the answer. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I think that Councillor Hamlin was going down this path, and I think that she's said it before, and I certainly agree with her whether she said it or not. And that is that as it relates to the financial sort of wealth within the community, whether it be Collingwood or beyond our borders, we are rich in our wealth of talent. And this would be one staff request that I would have no problem if our CAO came back and said, I'd like to maybe, repeat what we've done with our roundtable or with our COVID task force and invite some people from the community to participate in sharing their wealth of knowledge, because we do know people in the community who have vast experience in this type of field, who are experts, quite frankly. And I think that they would be willing to share their time and experience and really could round out the discussion for our CAO and help to expedite the process as well as minimize the impact as it relates to staff time. So I just leave it as a thought.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, before I call the vote, I will certainly speak in favor of this. Foundation is something I think that is a great vehicle for us to work with our community members in ways that we can support our communities, our social services organizations through operating grants and funds and generate those funds, but also through capital projects where our investors or our residents can invest and steer the direction of the community with their checkbooks. So I think it's a great opportunity to create that dialogue. And in terms of the regionalism, certainly you can create any number of funds underneath the rubric of a community foundation, so we can have that type of discussion. And so I look forward to finding out more about this exciting opportunity. So with that being said, I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Next, we have 10.3. It's the private woodlands bylaw and private trees bylaw, and that's a motion by Councillor Doherty. So I'll pass it over to you, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship. This motion is to ask Council to approve the advancement of the introduction of a private tree bylaw in Collingwood. And I'll just give you a bit of a rationale. As you recall, in March of this year, we received and passed and accepted the Urban Forest Management Plan that included a 5-year operating plan for enhancement of the urban canopy on our public lands. However, as identified in the stakeholder survey, 75% of all trees within the town's urban boundary are on private property. Thus, by focusing only on trees on public lands in the short term, we run the risk of failing to achieve the benefits of a robust urban canopy. Trees are coming down fast, not just through age and disease like the emerald ash borer, but also through construction, through renovation, and infill on private lands. Our residents have told us, even as recently as a community-based strategic plan update, which we reviewed tonight, that our natural environment is one of our core strengths, and we place high value on our urban canopy and our green spaces to enhance our feeling of well-being and to ensure the sustainability of our environment in the long term. Our oldest and most iconic trees are located on private lands in the older parts of town, where most infill is occurring. We've also seen on development lands where clear cut has been done far years and sometimes in advance of construction, based on our existing tree removal bylaw. To be clear, a private tree bylaw does not prevent the removal of trees on private property altogether, but what it does do is ensure that the removal of mature, healthy trees is not done frivolously. And where trees are removed, the property owner is required to replace them. The Collingwood Urban Forest Management Plan did acknowledge the need to develop a bylaw to protect private trees. However, the recommended timing for completion of this was 2022, which means in reality that the bylaw likely would not be implemented until 2023 or even beyond, which is fully 3 or more years from now. So in the meantime, a significant number of development and infill proposals are being received, and more are being received every day. Many municipalities have already instituted private tree preservation bylaws, including Toronto, Ottawa, Burlington, and Oakville, and that is just to name a few. So in my view, and what I'm asking of council is to increase the priority of a private tree preservation bylaw by implementing it at the same time as the highest priority actions to protect trees on public lands. And I'm asking council to support a resolution to advance the timing for preparation of a private tree protection bylaw to Q1 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Are there any questions or comments on this? I guess you need a seconder. We have a seconder for this motion. Councillor Berman. And so we've got that on the floor. Are there any questions? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just really to Director Farr, as in terms of the timing of that, if it's suitable, again, I like that we would do it. The timing seems to make sense, as long as, again, we have the resources.
Director Farr.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Jeffrey, Q1 2021 is going to be a very busy time for planning. We'll be in the midst of advancing the draft official plan and on our way to advancing the final plan. From my perspective, much like others, it's a question of resources. So this would be an item that from an actual implementation perspective, there'd have to be discussions internally among staff. I guess I'm fine having it kind of as a waypoint, and if we're able to target it and deliver it at that time, then we'll do so. But if we can, at least we have the marker in place, and we can have it top of mind and consider how to assemble the resources to get it done in the speediest fashion relative to everything else that's going on.
Any follow-up, Councillor Jeffrey?
No, thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So that completes motions. Bylaws, we have none. Notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion, Council? Go ahead. Sorry, Sonia.
I'm sorry, I didn't speak up quickly enough, Your Worship, but I think that the clerk had an item under bylaws.
Oh, Sarah, go ahead, please.
Certainly, Your Worship. The deputy clerk actually slid under your door the motions to approve the bylaws for the speed reduction.
Okay.
Just a second. Yeah, that's social distancing at its finest.
All right. So we have two bylaws then. The first one, I'll read it out and then I'll ask for movers and seconders. The first one is the resolve the bylaw number 2020-40 being a bylaw to permit encroachments onto the public boulevard within the town of Collingwood be enacted and passed this 15th day of June 2020. So these are bylaws to put in to implement the recommendations we just passed under the temporary road closure measures. So I've got Councillor Jeffrey and Deputy Mayor. No one will be able to read my writing, so hopefully someone will remember. All right, so it's moved by Councillor Jeffrey and seconded by Deputy Mayor Hall. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. And the second bylaw is the bylaw number 2020-41 being a bylaw to reduce the speed limit on Hurontario Street between 1st Street and 4th Street be enacted and passed this 15th day of June 2020. I get a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Comey and Councillor McLeod. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much for bringing that to my attention, and thank you for that fast action, sliding it under my door. I feel like I'm in solitary here. So notices of motion, we have none. County report, Deputy Mayor, I know there was one item, I think, about the bus fares. Do you want to speak to that?
Thank you. I was just going to mention that, and for those following along tonight, this is very specific to only the county. This is a county change. Effective July 2nd for the Lynx and the Lynx Plus, fares will be reinstated. Okay.
Did you say July 2nd? I'm sorry.
Yes,
okay.
July 2nd of this year.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. And I did want to mention one other thing that is not specific to Collingwood, but beneficial to the greater good, the slogan of the county. At our last meeting, this is a project that commenced in, I believe, 2018. We are one of 4 communities, Beaton, Collingwood, Penetanguishene, and Aurelia, where we've got one type or another of long-term care for our senior population. So in Collingwood, we're familiar with Sunset Manor, Sunset Village over on Raglan Street. Aurelia, sorry, not Aurelia, but Penetanguishene has just gone through an extensive redevelopment over a number of years. They have a beautiful campus that has, it's a blended community in terms of the different offerings from a housing standpoint for our aging in place demographic. And at our last county, we unanimously endorsed, and I just can't think of the number, I think it was $177 million redevelopment of the Beaton campus. And this will significantly, first of all, architecturally, and I apologize, I don't have a rendering, maybe we can pull it up next week, but it's beautiful. Two, it does provide that age in place ability with an increased capacity, not only in the number of rooms for fully assisted living, but more importantly, they've added a huge portfolio in the number of towns and singles, those types of things, where people can move to. And so this really creates a sense of community where people can have access to one place to another. They're connected with parks and you know, active means of mobility, et cetera. And so it's a really exciting venture for the county and their commitment to our aging demographic. One of the reasons that I mention it specifically tonight, other than the fact that it passed at our last county meeting, was the fact that COVID has really shed a light on our nursing homes, our facilities that are dedicated to looking after our parents. When I speak it from my, from my personal standpoint, even though they are not in a facility. And I just highlight the fact that the county really should be acknowledged, and in particular, under the direction of GM Jane Sinclair and her entire team, we have not had a COVID case in the 4 communities. We have had ongoing exemplary service within those 4 facilities. And it speaks to just the dedication on behalf of the county to ensuring that our facilities are properly run and exceed standards, so that, and it's come to fruition that through this tragic pandemic, they've been able to rise above and demonstrate that they really are providing exemplary care for the loved ones who call those 4 facilities home. So I just simply recognize that. Hats off to the county, and in particular GMG Sinclair and the thousands of people who work within those facilities to ensure that residents are looked after. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Well said. And I think in the development that's being proposed, there are 10 different types of housing stock, including co-housing, where they'll have people, they call it the Golden Girls type model, where they'll have a number of seniors living cooperatively in a single residence, and it really develops community and helps with creating that network that is so important. So thanks for that, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hamlin, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Hall. I really enjoyed hearing what the county's doing on that front and the campus idea. And I have to say, in those moments when I think we might get a new hospital, and if it is moved over to Poplar, it leaves our current hospital site for future development. And it has long struck me that that would be a great spot for the kind of campus that you're talking about. And I know that the planning for that kind of development would easily be a 10-year, well, I don't know how long it would take. Let's just say it would take a lot of time. And so my question to you is, do you think there's any appetite at the county for considering that kind of project in Collingwood?
Deputy Mayor?
If I may, I'm going to give you a very political answer, and please don't take it the wrong way. What you're suggesting, I think that we would all agree that if we could continue to have that kind of investment from the county, from the province, from private enterprise. We were part of I think, a development application that we approved earlier in our term for a new facility on Raglan, across from Raglan Village. It's a private facility dedicated to servicing members of the community with dementia. If I'm remembering that correctly, that's a terrible pun, and that was not intended. And I think that it's definitely, yes, we need to have these kinds of conversations, because you're right. It is a very long period of time. I only temper it only in the sense that we've been fortunate as a local municipality to have received fairly significant dollars lately as it relates to our developments on High and Second, and a few of upgrades to a few other facilities within the community. And the other 15 members may have a few words to say about that in terms of seeing dollars invested in their community. So we're fortunate today that we've got the that we're one of 4 campuses out of the 16 member municipalities. But you're right. I think that if the hospital were to be relocated to another location, we as a community are going to have a real opportunity to have a discussion about how do we develop that site, because it's a core site within the community. And we know that, the stats have borne this out for the last 30 years, that as migration continues north, it doesn't have to be Collingwood, it's anywhere north. It tends to be a 55 plus active market that's moving north. And if we can ensure that as they continue to move north, that they can age in place in the community that they've chosen. Another thing that we've seen as a trend is that, for example, somebody may be retiring to our community as an active retiree who's 55, they get up here, they fall in love with their community, and then they want their 85 or 90-year-old loved one who is in a facility, say maybe in Toronto or the GTA, to come up here to be part of them here. That totally makes sense. So if we can promote and try and advocate to ensure that as we grow, as our demographic grows in that respect, that we continue to see dollars come back through the county, and or Director Farr and the CAO being on the line, if we've got developers who are walking into our planning and development office, who are looking at moving forward different applications, we perhaps maybe at the staff level should be having conversations with them about, how can your complete community maybe reflect more of the demographic, and is there a part of something you're looking at doing to develop, incorporate, aging in place. Typically what we've seen, and they're lovely, they're very nice, but all of our subdivisions that have been built over the last 15 years tend to be one type of model of housing, and they tend to be sort of suited to one type of active segment within the market. And the presentation that we were fortunate to have a couple of weeks ago at our development and operations standing committee, about coincidentally out in that area on Raglan and the Poplar Side Road, about that campus, that idea of a complete community of housing opportunities where you have commercial and residential above, and then you've got accessibility so that people who are of all demographics can live and feel that they're one within a community, as opposed to being isolated in different facilities. So anyway, in the interest of not carrying this meeting over to Tuesday, I will end my comments there. But I couldn't agree with you more, and I'd be happy with the mayor to just throw those conversations out and see where they go as a preliminary at the county level. Because you're right, Councillor Hamlin, it's going to take 10 years, and we need to be starting to have those types of conversations.
And also, through you, Mr. Mayor, it strikes me that, as Deputy Mayor Hull's explained, it's a great opportunity for public-private partnerships in developing a project. And perhaps I'll just contact Deputy Mayor Hull offline and we can talk further. Thank you.
Sure.
You can talk about it, and there's 2 very big developments going on in Simcoe County in the long-term care and up in Springwater, and also down in Oromodonte with some McLean property. So those are things that are happening or in the works. First, we need to get moving, or we need the province to point us in the direction so that we can get our hospital going. So lots of moving parts on all of those discussions and our official plan review. So thank you for that. So item 14, council business. Is there any old or deferred business tonight, council? Okay, 14.2, other business. We had 2 items, but they've been dealt with. We've moved those around and dealt with them. So under other business, I have Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Doherty, and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I just wanted to bring to council and staff's attention that under FCM, the Green Municipal Funds regularly run Webby Week, and June 22nd to 29th is Webby Week. And the June 25th webinar I thought might be of interest to us, and Director Slama, who's not online right now, but is in the wake of COVID-19, we're going to need a recovery plan that includes sustainable shovel-ready projects. And this webinar will give information on how green municipal funding can improve and protect community water systems. So I thought that would be of interest to someone. And also in the trend of virtual events, FCM's Sustainable Communities Conference, which is done biannually. It's a terrific event. Has gone virtual for October 20th to the 22nd. Always a lot of good information, and the theme this year is bringing projects to life. And also our Collingwood Water Project. This is the conference that it is will be considered for an award. That's it.
Good, thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much. This would be a question through you to our CAO or possibly to Director Milanovic. Based on the recent closure of some of our beaches in Wasaga Beach and also in the town of the Blue Mountains, either closures of the beaches or closures of the parking lots, are we anticipating any increased traffic for our own Sunset Point? And are we taking any steps to address that, if that is the case?
Director Milanovic.
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Doherty. With recent remediations to the park, along with the approved 2020 operating budget, allows us to take significant steps to formalize the parking situation at Sunset Point. Some of the parking issues in the past were due to the lack of formalized parking, which caused an uneven distribution of people and vehicles in the park, as well as no clear enforceable way to identify when the park was full, especially from a parking perspective. Staff are currently looking to post signage in existing no parking zones. Additionally, staff will be bringing forward a parking bylaw in July that proposes introduction of further parking restrictions in the area. In the event council approves those bylaw provisions, staff will post further signage in the area. The town is also currently working with a provider to develop smartphone pay parking technology. Once the software system is in place, council would be able to consider the expansion of pay for parking in areas outside the downtown core. If council chooses to do so, implementation would require amendments to the parking bylaw, and area-specific plans would need to be put in place to address matters like resident parking and overflow impacts on surrounding streets. Staff will be reviewing the system adopted by both the town of Blue Mountain and the town of Wasaga Beach.
Thank you, Director Milanovic. And you said that would be coming back to council in July?
I would have to defer to Director Farr.
Okay. Adam?
I apologize, I just didn't hear his last point. I think the question was, when's it coming back? It's coming back in July, the parking bylaw.
Great, thank you. Councillor Doherty, was there any follow-up?
No, thank you. That was very thorough anticipation, and once again demonstrates out of adversity comes new opportunity. So thank you very much. I look forward to July.
Councillor Hamlin, I had you on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our staff, and excuse the noise here briefly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm wondering if I could please have an update on the status of the tree planting program that is contemplated as a result of the generous gift of Ms. Julie DiLorenzo. I know things have been held up because of the COVID season that is upon us, but I'm hoping someone could give us an update. Thank you.
Executive Director or Director Milanovic, I don't know who wants to take that one.
Through your worship, I can help Mel out with this one, since it was a project that sort of started as I was when I was still in the PRC role. So obviously COVID's thrown a bit of a curveball at us, and we're struggling to just kind of get back to some sort of operational normalcy with half of our park staff, or less than half of our park staff, plus a whole pile of new protocols and provisions in place that have to be adhered to. That's not to say that we aren't still definitely interested in seeing some part of the plan implemented. The plan basically had three parts. One was to plant a forest park at Fisher Field in the fall, and we still believe that that can be done. And we'd like to see that first step take hold sometime in the fall. It requires us to go through a procurement process to acquire the trees. That's staff time and energy that has to be directed that way, but we think that we can get there, and optimistically speaking, we will, and we'll get there for the fall. The other two parts of the program had a lot to do with sort of outreach. VCA, for example, was going to take care of a planting program in some of the areas that they manage, and that required, we have no idea at this point whether students will be engaging in field trips as they would to support the planting program. So we're still sort of hopeful, and we will enter some dialogue with MVCA in the future to see if that can happen in the fall. But there's I would say, somewhat of a likelihood that that part of the program would be deferred to the spring. The final piece of the puzzle was a back planning program where residents would get involved. Again, it seems like a simple approach, and it seems like something that can be done, but we're working with less than half capacity. So if we were able to engage something by the fall, it'll be dependent not only on resources to get the procurement piece done, lining up the vendors in order to take care of the couponing part of the program, but also how we actually do the transfer of trees and handing off materials to people, and then following up to make sure that the program is as successful as we would want it to be. So that one I would say is sort of in the moderate to gray space, and again might be best looked at for a spring project. But we really do believe that we can get the forest park completed. So that's kind of the priority focus right now.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
All right. Any other business? Councillor Comey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. I received an email. It's the second email on this topic I've received from this resident, and I'd like to take the opportunity with two members of the Police Services Board here with us as a council to bring attention to speed concerns on Portland Avenue. And when a resident sends me an email and they use words like speeds are terrifying, and we think to a very tragic incident that happened about a week ago in Angus, where a young boy was killed on his bicycle. And we think about week after week, as a council, we're continually talking about our residents of all ages and abilities being more active on bikes and walking. So I'm asking, please, for some assistance. This is Portland, I get emails on, as well as Finley Drive. So sooner than later, our residents need some assistance with some police patrols in those areas.
I'll look to Chair Jeffrey to comment on that.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. From the board's perspective, we don't direct the police on how to do their resources, but we continue to message how significantly important it is for all of those emails that you receive to please encourage everyone with every incident to report it to the police, not on the 911, but on the office. And if they can get license plate numbers, it would be very effective, because then police can follow up with vehicle owners who aren't always necessarily the drivers. But it is so important to please keep messaging to the people you receive these messages from that they should phone the police and report each and every incident.
And which number is that, Councillor Jeffrey?
It's the regular office, not 911, and I don't have it on me.
So
it used to be I can't remember it. Care Bear Countdown was the way I used to remember it.
I think what we'll do is send that out to council in a general email. And I think also through our public works, we do have the flashing signs. So if there are areas in town where we seem to have chronic problems, perhaps advising Director Slama and making it known so that we can relocate those flashing signs. They are, I think, very effective as well.
Oh, Director Slama, who's not on the line right now, is she back? Her comments? Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. And you and I have been corresponding, and I wanted to bring the police in as well, because flashing signs are wonderful and our residents appreciate that. But I want to make sure as a council, I'm sharing that with all of us as a community, that we have an obligation to continually keep this in the forefront of the discussion, that our residents are using words like terrifying and unacceptable. And we are all acutely aware of the volume of children that are playing and biking on the roads because the parks are closed, or even they're back from uni and they don't have a summer job. We're all aware of this. So we all have a shared responsibility to honor these messages from our residents and ensure we're doing all we can. So I would very much appreciate that number, because as a councillor, I'm embarrassed that I don't know that. And perhaps if Executive Director Culver, we've made a commitment to do some community messaging on this, then we better put that number up there so our residents know what they can do to take some action on this.
And just a reminder to all of council, if you receive a comment or an email from a resident, you ask their permission to forward it to the appropriate staff, and you send it to the department head and the CAO so that all staff are aware of it. Councillor McLeod, you had your hand up.
705-445-4321.
Can you say it faster? Slower, please. That was too fast.
705-445-4321.
Can we just put that number everywhere, please, so our residents can get some assistance on this?
I think we can. Councillor Jeffrey, you've got your hand up.
And just to respond, that is in fact 445 Care Bear Countdown, which I used to tell my kids to be able to call the police. 445-4321.
Deputy Mayor, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I just was going to reiterate your point just about, I mean, it doesn't matter what the subject is, but if that type of language, and not to suggest that's not warranted, those correspondents they need to go on to the appropriate people so that it's logged, and that well, I'll be quite honest and blunt. If ever something happened and we weren't aware of that type of correspondence, then we've got a problem. On a positive, and I will send a photo because it could be something that is applicable. I'm thinking more of Findlay, but certainly Portland as well. Findlay, because the school is there. I saw the most simple, and I thought the coolest signage, and that in a residential area, and essentially it's in the center of the street where you would have a yellow line or white hash marks, or whatever the case may be, and it's probably 1.5 meters, 2 meters tall, and it's simply just a white sign, and at the top it's got the school crossing, but you've got a couple of them down the street, so they're reflective at night. Somebody accidentally hits them, they bend over and bounce back. they're screwed into the ground, that type of thing. But it's what's neat about it, it's in the middle of the street. And so if I'm driving in the street, my steering wheel is on the left-hand side. You can't miss that sign. And it's funny, Councillor Comey will appreciate this. I happen to be on Finley today coming eastbound, and the school sign is covered. It's buried. It's buried by the trees.
Yeah, a lot of them are right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I saw the sign literally in the middle of the street, that's really kind of cool, because you either run over it or you see it properly and you avoid it. But more importantly, it forces you to psychologically slow down. So anyway, I'll send the photos on, because it was a neat concept. I've never seen it before.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Bylaw. And that is moved by Councillor Jeffrey and seconded by Councillor Hamlin. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-39, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of council held June 15, 2020, be enacted and passed this 15th day of June 2020. Council, all in favor? That is passed unanimously. So the final act to draw this very busy meeting and productive meeting to a close is the motion to adjourn, and Councillor Jeffrey has moved it. All in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the evening.